citizens who are wanting to comment? We usually have our expensive lawyer go do that for us. Thank you. Okay, we have 3 people. Benny G. Benny, do you want to come to the speaker and? Yeah, that'd be great.
Good evening. My name is Benny Gonzalez. I live at 3145 Eaton Street here in Wheat Ridge. And I want to talk about the agenda item number 3 for kind of standardizing, the building codes, redoing them, standardizing them, or making them, a little bit more tolerable with the existing city of Wheat Ridge residents. I moved here because of the quaint, I've already said this before, the cuteness of Wheat Ridge. I didn't want North Denver, and so I moved to Wheat Ridge. And now, come to find that Wheat Ridge is kind of coming like North Denver with maximizing homes on a property. 3100 Fenton, I brought up in the last meeting and the meeting before that when I came. That's a big 3-story home that just utilizes practically every inch of the whole land that it's on. And it took away my view of my mountains when the trees are not in bloom, that is. And it just broke my heart to see that big house that does not fit the neighborhood. And that's what I'm here for. So let's talk about making houses, building homes that fit the neighborhood. That's what I'm about here. Let's have Wheat Ridge be the leader in keeping the little town atmosphere, and let's not worry about our neighbors keeping in line with their codes or their standards. Let's keep Wheat Ridge the cute little town that it is and be a leader in that. That's what attracted me here. Now, if there are people out there that would like these big homes and the new modern, well, they can probably look elsewhere because, let's keep Wheat Ridge quaint and cute, and let's make the houses match the architecture of this one house, particular 3100 Fenton, doesn't match any architecture in the neighborhood in, I'd say, a 3 or 4 block radius, if that, if it could be even more. So if we kept the architecture on new builds to match the neighborhood within maybe a two block radius, and let's have the people say, yeah, that looks good, let's vote on it, let's have the people in the neighborhood have a little bit of say-so on it. If it's too big, out of line, let's compromise. Let's make something work for everybody. That's what I was thinking. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Benny.
And I was thinking maybe the height on the residential, the new build, be about 25 feet. They want a 3rd story, dig deeper and put their 3rd story there. Okay? I mean, is my 3 minutes up? Okay,
so.
sorry. Oh, I see it. Oh, the green, yellow, okay. Well then, I've expressed my opinion, and I was looking at some of the agenda items, and there was a picture here with Edgewater Bulk Plain, and that doesn't look too bad. It's figure 2, Edgewater Bulk Plain, lower intensity uses. If we're gonna, follow a neighbor, let's follow one that, matches the neighborhood. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Al Lazalde? Lazalde? That's what I thought it was. Followed by Melissa Archuleta. That's on. I'm just not talking.
Hey, my name is Al Lasalde. I live at 2928 Chase. I'm here to speak on agenda item number 3. I looked over some of the studies you folks have already done. Ms. Duran had emailed me them. And there was a lot of comparisons to Denver, Arvada, Lakewood, North Denver. And I keep on asking myself, we're not these areas. We are Wheat Ridge. I really feel strongly about the 20-foot, 25-foot height, and try to build with responsibility in the area. I'm not against growth, but we need to be responsible to the neighborhood and your constituents. I received an email from Ms. Duran telling me about, she did find some indication that meeting was in 2012, and it was dealing with the height variance, and I didn't get any response back anymore from what the minutes might have been. But there was a council member there, and they did say that this would not happen to our area, about scraping the lots and building these three-story houses like they do in North Denver, which they call Highlands now. And we are not Denver, Arvada, Lakewood, or North Denver. We are Wheat Ridge. Let's keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. And Melissa?
I'm Melissa Archuleta, and I live at 2906 Depew Street. And I'm also here to speak on item number 3, the residential development standards. I'm here today to voice my concerns and the concerns of my neighbors about the 3- and 4-story developments that are popping up in Wheat Ridge. I would like our mayor and our city council members to address this issue and inform their constituents on how they plan to deal with this sort of development. Wheat Ridge is more than just a neighborhood, it's a community, and I believe that this type of construction is going to kill the charm and the relative affordability of our city. The most successful and thriving communities are multi-generational, they're diversified, and they're mixed income. We don't need to become another overdeveloped, disgruntled community in Colorado, and your constituents are extremely interested in knowing that the revitalization of Wheat Ridge is being done with good intentions and with the respect to its community that's already here. Neighborhoods are always going to evolve. I understand that, and there definitely needs to be compromises. It's not fair to say that you can't scrape a home and build a new home. We have very old homes in our community, but it's not fair to allow a 3-story mega house to be sitting on top of a 1-story building. That's just ridiculous. Right now in Denver, there are communities that are being formed to develop better housing solutions. Architects, developers, and people within the community are working together to develop houses and buildings that respect the neighborhood and have a positive impact on the city. And we can do this in Wheat Ridge. A collaborative design review process that includes developers, architects, designers, and the community, not just those folks, is a really good first step. I love my neighborhood, the other folks here, we love our neighborhood, and we don't want it to become another Denver atrocity. Let Wheat Ridge be innovative, let them be a leader in its revitalization, not just another disheartened neighborhood filled with these 3-story box houses. You've heard the concerns of the community. There's only a few of us sitting here today, but every neighbor on my block feels the exact same way, so we want to hear from all of you. And I think it's important to do it now before it's too late.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, that is all that I have signed up, so I'm going to move on to staff reports. Item 1A is on pawn shops.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I've asked Commander Mark Cooney and Detective Keith Weimer to come up and present this particular staff report and discuss with you the issues and what the PD's recommended. So, Mark?
Hello. I'm the commander of the Detective Bureau here in Wheat Ridge, as many of you know. One of the main issues that we deal with, or one of the big issues anyway, is the recovery of stolen property and the prosecution of people that would break into somebody's house or commit other type of theft to steal this property. So one of my roles as commander is to look for ways to enhance our ability to recover this property and to catch these criminals. Detective Weimer came up with a proposal that I've outlined in the staff report, and we've worked with the city attorney to come up with some changes to our ordinance that I think would help this. Basically, it amounts to three major things. One is the kind of the updating of some of the record keeping that we do now to go along with current technology. And this is the Leads Online database that we currently use, but it requires people that take in property that for resale to enter the information, and it's via the internet. It's no cost to the businesses that would do it. The city pays a fee to use this Leads Online, so that would be no cost. The pawn shops currently use that database. It's quite helpful in identifying stolen property, excuse me, such as like class rings or antique jewelry or something like that that we could trace back and return to an owner and perhaps make a case, a burglary case, by developing leads through the recovery of the property. The second-hand dealers don't use that Leads Online now, so we would like to include the second-hand dealers on the requirement that the pawn shops currently use on that. Another part is the use of digital photography, so it'd be taking a photograph of the person that comes in and pawns that item or sells it to a second-hand shop and keep that in the database. Currently, the pawn shops use a video recorder on the door, but the video quality isn't very good. A lot of times we have like a picture of the top of a ball cap or something like that. Not a good picture of the person's face. And also on the video, they don't keep it for, it doesn't stay in the database. So like we just had a case last week where we went back later. By that time, the video had already been removed, hadn't been saved, so we weren't able to get any video from the pawn shop to get a picture of this person that had pawned the stolen property. So we would like to require the digital photo. And then the third piece I kind of already alluded to, and that is to align the second-hand dealers that would take in property over $30 value. And again, we've listed exclusions and that type of thing, but we're trying to come up with property that would likely be stolen in a house burglary, electronics, bicycles, things like that, to keep these records and to have this photograph. So again, we could recover property, get it back to the rightful owner, and make a prosecutable case on the person breaking into, or that may have broken into their house or stolen the property. Oftentimes, when we locate one item like that, we can tie it to several cases. A lot of times somebody that break into one house and steal something had broken into a lot of houses and stolen something. So that allows us to get some of these bad guys off the street as far as catching the residential burglars. So that's kind of a summation of what we're trying to accomplish. Keith, did I cover what you had brought forward?
So thanks, Mark. I should have introduced Detective Weimer as our Metropolitan Auto Theft Task Force detective. So he's incognito, if you couldn't tell, because they do some undercover work. But in essence, I think the staff report lays out both sort of the workload and what we face from a property crime perspective. What's really important from both this pawn shop and secondhand dealer is, when somebody's garage is broken into or their car's broken into or there's a burglary, those valuable items that citizens lose oftentimes end up being sold either through a pawn shop or a secondhand dealer, and we need a good mechanism to track that. There currently exists state statutes that require pawnbrokers to adhere to certain requirements and also require secondhand dealers to do some mandatory reporting, and we do get compliance in those areas. But as was included in your packet, I believe, was a picture of the data files, the paper files from that, and it requires people to sort through those and look through those. And if we can bring both pawn shops and secondhand dealers into some alignment as it pertains to leveraging technology to make our job easier and make our detectives more efficient, then it'll make us better in terms of solving crime. There are a number of jurisdictions that have already put these requirements in place, and we're just seeking to modify our ordinance, bring it up to standard. There's nothing in our ordinance really that is outside the scope of state law. There are some requirements there that will make us more efficient as an agency. So happy to answer any questions anybody has in regards to this and get some staff direction or get some council direction in regards to bringing this back in the form of a ordinance revision.
Council have questions or go ahead, Ms. Davis.
I think this is a great idea. And I just, one clarification, though I don't think it's a clarification, I think I already have the answer. Consignment would not be secondhand dealer, right? Because obviously if I was a thief, I wouldn't give you my name and phone number to call me when you sold my goods. But I just wanted to make sure that that's a, you know, not the same thing you're not considering. So that's all, but I think it's a great idea.
Other thoughts? Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As it relates to the systems that we're asking the dealers to participate in, they already have access to those and would be able to join in those systems. The secondhand dealers would be able to join in the same systems that the pawnbrokers are currently accessing and would be
Yes.
able to manage those as
They just need a computer to do that. And
Okay.
This day and age, I think just about everybody, including my 4-year-old granddaughter, has access to a computer, you know, so they would, you know, join that, apply to that. We're the ones that pay the fee to use the data that's stored in there, so it's not really a cost to
And then they're required to hold the digital photo of the person, just the person selling that property for a 30-day period, or is there a time frame that we're asking them to hold that for?
The files are kept for 30 days. However, Leads Online tends to keep that on the database for as long as we have Leads Online, right, Keith? Maybe you can address that more.
It could be years from the picture will still be there.
It just becomes part of basically the transaction record.
So one of the challenges that we face today with the paper system and the way that we're doing it right now is, you know, a report comes in, you know, we get it, it's an open pending lead, there's no suspect information, and then we'll get a pawn slip, or secondhand dealer slip that comes through. You know, the detectives review those, or technicians, investigative technicians review those, and if they see a possible match or a lead, they'll you know, notify the detective. We'll get somebody out there, but sometimes it's beyond that 30 days. That typically they hold the current information, so we'll lose the videotape. And then the other challenge is just the challenge of if we could show you pictures. Oftentimes the video that's shot is the top of somebody's head and the ball cap, you know, and you really don't have enough to pursue leads on that. So this would require something like a driver's license photo, an actual, you know, frontal photo of somebody selling that, and that's done in many other jurisdictions.
And we're looking for a picture taken in that shop at that present
Yes,
time, not
that
taken
person.
from their driver's license.
Right, that's correct.
And then have we spoken with any pawnbrokers or secondhand dealers in relationship to this as to their acceptance of this? Are they expecting this and it seems amenable to them, or?
Right, we've, Detective Weimer, Detective Pa, Commander Cooney have gone out and personally talked to all of our secondhand dealers, all of our pawn shops, a variety of other individuals. We've solicited their input in this, listened to what they have to say. You know, some are supportive of what we're trying to do, some are less than supportive, but I think they all understand what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Duran?
I wanted to say I think this would be a great tool to make your jobs more efficient, easier for everyone. It also mentioned in here that there's no direct financial impact, so the costs would stay the same. Can you explain to me? Is that the case?
Right, so no cost to the secondhand dealer or the pawn shop dealer. We pay a fee. It's a software licensing fee to be part of LexisNexis that does our pawn shop, or Leads Online, I'm sorry, not LexisNexis. So we pay an annual fee. We've done that in the past. Some of our pawn shops currently use the computerized system. Won't be an increase in the fee. It's just standard software maintenance, and I can't remember what the fee is.
$3,700 a year we pay you.
$3,700 a year. So,
Okay, and Leads Online, have they been around for quite a while?
oh, many years.
Many years? Okay, all right, thank you.
Well, I can see it has some deterrent qualities as well. Do we have any other questions, or can we get a, yeah, Ms.
I have
Davis?
a quick one, and I think this is a question with all of these things, if it's code enforcement or, how will you audit that these, you know, that folks are complying? I mean, I guess that's the $1 million question now, too. But is there any way to do a spot check or, I mean, how do you audit that?
So it's good old investigative police work, right? So I can tell you, 30 years ago, that was a challenge for us in terms of auditing, gold coin shops and stuff. And it's good police work that ends up resulting in finding out who the legitimate business owners are and
Right.
who the criminals are, and we get that information, from informants. We get that from follow-up on cases, and we learn that it's really difficult to do an audit per se, because it's a citizen's right to go in there and pawn or sell their property, right? So we're not interested, nor do we have the resources to sort of audit that. But eventually we find out who the criminal element within this field is, and we're able to address that. And this is just one way of making us more efficient in dealing with legitimate pawnbrokers and secondhand dealers.
Okay, it sounds like we're having a favorable reaction. I need someone to offer a consensus to accept the amendments that are recommended. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them.
I offer a consensus to accept the proposal as presented in the package.
Sound good?
Okay, great, thanks. We'll bring
We
that
have show of
forward
hands.
on first reading, the next meeting.
Bring it forward on first reading.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Chief.
Mark. Keith.
Thanks, Keith.
Item B, Justice Assistant Grant.
So I'm doing a little succession planning here, all right? I'm trying to develop my staff's capacity to interact with council, so I've asked Division Chief Pickett to present the 2016 Justice Assistance Grant.
I think he's trying to get out of the meeting. Mayor Jane, Council, the 2016-2017 Justice Assistance Grant has allocated $11,288 to the Wheat Ridge Police Department to use for law enforcement programs. They have asked that we key these our expenditures on several different things, including prosecution and court programs, prevention, education, corrections and community corrections, drug treatment, planning and evaluation technology, and crime and crime victims and witness programs. We have 3 projects we would like to use the $11,288 for. The first falls under law enforcement programs with drug treatment and enforcement as a secondary. And it is a poll camera system. We currently use poll cameras that we borrow from other jurisdictions in order to do investigations. And what a clandestine poll camera is, it's a camera that keeps track of a particular area. It's placed on a telephone or utility pole. It's out of sight of the general public, and it can be monitored by detectives or police officers. We're fortunate enough to have one of our detectives was trained to be a technician to install these through his work with the Drug Task Force, and so we would be able to, as soon as we had that equipment, we would be able to put it to use. We use them for all sorts of investigations. I'll give you an example. We had a particular homeowner who was being really terrorized by people in the neighborhood. We didn't know who was doing it. We put up a camera. In that case, the homeowner knew the camera was there. And we were using that camera to gather intelligence. Unfortunately, the group that loaned us that camera needed it back before we were able to make a case. But luckily, we had an officer doing surveillance, was able to make that case. But that would have been much more efficient had we been able to keep that. So that poll camera system is $5,870. For $4,565, we have an update to our traffic reconstruction software. We use that. Our crash and traffic team uses that to handle major
crashes, especially those involving serious bodily injury or fatalities. Currently, we don't have the ability to take that animation or take that recreation and turn it into animation, which is something that is being increasingly asked for in court. And so we would like to update that system. The overage then would be going to overtime for our community policing projects. That would be Boyd's Crossing, TLC Neighborhoods, and the East Wheat Ridge project. And that funds extra patrols and bike patrols, things like that. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Fitzgerald.
Well, this is just sort of a lateral question. I noticed that this grant is designed to cover other kinds of things, and I'm just wondering, do we have any indigent defense budget?
I'm going to have to go back a little bit. Oh, would you like to do that? Okay. So if I take your question right, your question pertains to providing legal counsel to people who can't afford it. The state legislature and the governor recently signed a bill that requires municipal courts to provide sort of a public defender to those who are indigent. And I know that the judge is in the process of evaluating that from both a cost perspective and finding interested attorneys who are interested in that. And I think that takes effect. I think it takes effect. I can find out for you.
July 1st.
July 1st. And we're required to do that as a city.
Okay, as a second question, do we have any corrections and community corrections programs?
So we have a county. Jefferson County has a variety of community correction programs and several work release community corrections program. It's run out of a facility in Lakewood that addresses those who are in the county or state criminal justice system through county court, and the city has one probation officer for court programs. You bet.
Any other questions or comments? Well, Deputy Chief Pickett, I guess you've done a wonderful job.
So just one other thing on this. The grant does require council consensus on what we do, and it also requires community input. So we advertised today's study session on our website and through social media as an opportunity for citizens to provide input, provided them with a number. To my knowledge, we haven't received any direct citizen input. Certainly received input from you all, and we just need a consensus to move forward on this. So
I'd like to move a consensus forward that the recommendations made in the memo be moved forward, and that the items presented in the memo be made.
Mr. Urban, you're offering the consensus then. Thank you. And I have a show of hands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Pickett.
They're going to need those chairs, aren't they?
What's that?
Okay, let's move on to Clear Creek Crossing update.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We're happy to give you an update on the Clear Creek Crossing project. Scott and I will tag team this a little bit, but then we also have a interested developer who would like to introduce themselves to council and give a kind of a general update on where they are looking at the site and looking at it and their vision for the project. But for those of you who've been around, we've been working on this project for many, many years. I won't go back all 13 years, but go back almost 9 years. And the environmental assessment was done for the site, which is required because we're looking at transportation infrastructure improvements that would impact the interstate system. The environmental assessment, to keep it very simple and short, basically outlines a number of improvements that had to be constructed for the site before any store could open. And those improvements were anywhere between $40 and $50 million at the time. And the improvements included new interchange on Highway 58, hook ramps off I-70 into the site, and major improvements to the 32nd and Youngfield interchange. Some of those improvements have been made, including, and a few others that weren't, I don't think they were necessarily required for the EA, but an underpass under I-70 at 40th was built, and as you remember, the city received a grant to do some work at 32nd and Youngfield, so there were some improvements done. That 32nd Youngfield project originally included the hook ramps as part of it too. That piece was not done. So one of the reasons, there were numerous reasons why the project still hasn't developed, and one of the biggest reasons was the amount of infrastructure that had to be completed. No developer wanted to underwrite those improvements in the city, couldn't afford to do those improvements on our own. So the project just went in pencil in the past. We worked with numerous developers over the last decade or so on the site. We had numerous proposals presented to us, and it just didn't work out. So a couple of years ago, we, I think this was right before Scott started, tried to figure out how to be proactive and move this project forward. So we decided to go to Colorado Department of Transportation, the Federal Highway Administration, and ask if we could do a reevaluation of the environmental assessment that was done, to allow us to potentially phase in those improvements, so all 40 to 50 million didn't have to be built at the same time. We came to City Council just over 2 years ago to ask for some funding to do that process, and we hired Parsons Brinkerhoff because they would have to do a traffic study, an updated traffic study, which was part of the reevaluation with CDOT. Fortunately, that was approved and finalized with CDOT and Federal Highway Administration. It took longer than we anticipated, but they did approve a phasing approach for these infrastructure improvements. However, to continue moving the process forward, they require a phase 2 reevaluation of the environmental assessment, and that's kind of why we're here tonight, to ask you for permission to move forward with that, and I'll let Scott get into that a little bit. Actually, maybe I'll just turn it over to Scott right now, and then we'll maybe introduce Evergreen.
Okay, Patrick went over the history pretty well here, and I think there's a lot of documentation attached in your packet here that kind of describes the environmental assessment a little bit more. But as Patrick mentioned, back in the day, 2006, 2007, when Cabela's was proposing a huge store that would be a big regional draw along with other facilities, it required about $50 million worth of infrastructure improvements, including everything Patrick described. And again, the site is roughly the area west of I-70, south of Highway 58, and north of 32nd Avenue, that whole area. And then in more recent years, economics, the way things are, have developed over time. For somebody to come in and propose something like was proposed back in 2006, 2007, just isn't going to happen in this day and age, at least with what we've been seeing. So we were approached a couple of years ago by a different proposer who wanted to do something on the site, maybe about a third of the size of development of what was originally proposed, and asked what kind of infrastructure improvements would be needed for that. So we went through what was called a phase 1 evaluation. We met with CDOT and Federal Highway Administration first. We wanted to make sure we were doing the process correctly. Did we have to reopen the whole EA environmental assessment and go through that whole exercise again, or could we just take what was done back in the day and update it, revise new traffic counts, new changes in environmental laws that may have come along, that kind of thing. And they agreed that the reevaluation was the way to go, that we could do that. That was still a fairly long process. We went through that over a couple years, and the phase 1 allowed us to go ahead and do a development on the site, but again, about a third of the size, and it would not require any of the more significant infrastructure improvements. Since then, we've had interest from Evergreen here, who's interested in going into more of a phase 2 level, something more at the level maybe a half, 2/3 the size of what Cabela's was proposing. So we're going to go ahead and go through that next evaluation phase with CDOT to determine what has to be done and when, depending on the rate of development. So I think with that, maybe we can turn it over.
Maybe we'll turn it over and let Evergreen do a quick presentation, and then we'll open up for any questions. But I'd like to introduce Tyler Carlson and Erica Shorter are both here tonight. Can you find it? It's on the desktop there. There's 2 documents. You find it? Okay. And we've been working with Evergreen not only on this site, but they're actually looking at numerous sites in Wheat Ridge right now, and we have a pretty good relationship with them. So it's a pleasure to have them on this project to see if we can activate it. Probably got to come over here. You doing the blank?
Slides up when we can.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you. Tyler Carlson, Evergreen Development. I am one of the principals of the company. I run our Colorado operations. We've been around for 40 years, not in Colorado, out of Arizona and California originally. We've been in Denver for about the last 10. And as Patrick mentioned, we are very active across the Front Range, and we specialize in retail and multifamily development, mixed-use projects. I think the closest one to this building is probably the multifamily project we built in Golden, across from the Jefferson County complex. It's where that light rail bridge goes across the highway, and we're at the top of the hill next to the Panorama Orthopedic. A great project we're proud of. So we became involved with the Clear Creek property actually last year. We've been working on it for quite some time. But the reason we're coming forward now to start the introduction process of who we are in our project with the city is because the phase 1 reevaluation has been approved. And Patrick understated it is monumental what the city has done over the past several years. It is some of the best money I think you guys have invested personally, because it took a project that was previously high-centered on infrastructure and now allows it at least an opportunity to even contemplate moving forward. So it's a big deal. The downside is that, which is good for the city, but is that we're proposing to do something a little bit larger than the initial phase 1 that was reapproved contemplated. Our hope is to really develop all of the land that Cabela's currently owns south of the Clear Creek River. And the difference being between our proposal and what Cabela's was planning on years ago is that it'll be a true mixed-use environment. Retail, employment, entertainment, some a housing component. So this 80 acres, instead of being what Cabela's had hoped to do, a kind of a retail Disneyland that frankly was never going to happen in my opinion or the market's opinion. Do something it's more of a live, work, play environment, which we think will be in keeping with the spirit of what Wheat Ridge is trying to accomplish. And also, still importantly, generate a sales tax, which is also important for the city's bottom line long term. So I brought today just a couple of our most recent projects here in Colorado, just to give you a sample of what we're doing out there. This is the Sprouts we opened a couple years ago on East Colfax by National Jewish, a project that I'm pretty proud of. It was pretty transformative for that neighborhood. We were one of the first to go through with Main Street zoning and had to get creative with some architecture, and it's a real nice building we're proud of. This is something we're under construction on right now out in Stapleton. It's called East Bridge Town Center. We've got rooftop patios. We've got a very cool ice cream kiosk with it's actually an airplane wing roof that's coming off of it. Chef-driven restaurants we're pulling out of downtown. It's a partnership we're doing with actually the Larimer Square team. It's anchored. There's a King Soopers anchor, but there's a lot of really high-quality multi-tenant. This is a King Soopers marketplace we opened up in Aurora last year down by the Cherokee Trail High School in Talon's Reach. Great project that we're proud of. More traditional suburban, but well done. We're actually in a public-private partnership right now with the town of Erie at 287 in Arapahoe. We call it 9 Mile Corner. This is a rendering we did for the town's RFP process last year that kind of shows our vision. Again, a town center component. There'll be hopefully a grocery angle. There'll be a housing piece to it. Again, a mixed-use 45-acre center that we're proud to be working on with the town of Erie. These are some shots of the Outlook Golden project I mentioned by the Jefferson County complex. We think it's a notch above your typical apartment deal. 4-story walk-up construction, You may or may not like the colors. We get, different opinions on that. But, connectivity to the TOD that's there. There's actually a mixed-use component, highly amenitized and fully leased actually now, which we're happy about. And then actually, this is our most recent opening. Last week, we opened up a Sprouts up in Loveland. Erica, my partner's here. This was a 7 property owner, 9 property assemblage we did in the heart of Loveland. It took a public-private partnership with the city. It was a pain in the ass deal, I will tell you. And it was not without controversy. And it was a split council vote, but it's a catalytic project for the end of their old town. And I think the reason why I show some of these projects, just to let you guys know, we're not a fly-by-night developer. We don't take on easy projects. Eric and I were talking this morning. I don't think this is the smartest way to make money. But we're really passionate about what we do, and we're really committed to creating projects that are going to be transformative for the community. And we're not afraid to roll up our sleeves and work hard. And that's why we're dealing with things like Phase 2 evaluations and highway on-ramps and things like this. So the reason why I'm still with the company after 13 years is the 3 partners who I work with down in Arizona are some of the most honest people you'll ever meet. We've never been sued. We've never defaulted on a loan in 500 projects in 40 years, and we do what we say we're going to do. And so we look forward to starting really the journey with the city. I can tell you that you'll see a lot more of me, and for better or for worse, at this podium, because now that the pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together from the infrastructure standpoint, we've got some employment, entertainment, and retail anchors that we're negotiating with right now. And as that all falls together, we're hoping in the next 60 days we will be putting together a submittal package and coming back to you all with more detail. You should know that it's, and here's actually a picture of the site, which is gorgeous, actually. You should know that as far as the infrastructure is concerned, we're actually going to stick pretty closely to the plans that were previously approved. When Cabela's did this years ago, they actually had fully permitted plans. I mean, they could have gone out and built, the infrastructure, but, the costs were prohibitive. And so, what we're calling Clear Creek, it used to be Cabela Drive, now it's Clear Creek Drive, will still continue through. We'll terminate it at Clear Creek. We're connecting to the 40th Street underpass. The hook ramps remain basically the same. And so the infrastructure package is fairly similar. The difference between now and years ago will be the mixture of uses, which we think, frankly, will be better for the long-term sustainability of the community. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. But obviously, we have a strong hope that you guys will approve Scott and Patrick to move forward with us on the Phase 2 reevaluation. Because it is the critical path for us to getting out of the ground. And we're very anxious to get going. The reason being is, as you all know, real estate cycles are finite. And we are fairly long into this current real estate cycle, and we want to capture the interest we've got and make Clear Creek happen this cycle and not be back in another 10 years waiting for the next cycle. So with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler. And real quickly, too, before maybe we go into questions, we did put out feelers for some traffic engineers to help us with the Phase 2. And we do have 3, I think, proposals back, and we just got the last one, I think, today. So we actually have a conference call scheduled for tomorrow to review those. So we don't have a price yet on exactly what Phase 2 would cost. We're probably looking at a minimum of $100,000. Potentially, I think one of the proposals came in maybe double that. So, but we need to evaluate those to see exactly what the true cost is. The good news is that the projects, when it moves forward, will pay back the city for these costs for this phase and then Phase 1 too. So, if we haven't discussed full financial deals and mechanisms, but if bonds are issued or whatever, the city this would be one cost that would be reimbursed to the city. So it is an investment. I think it's an important one, as Tyler mentioned, that it is. I think unfortunately, it took so long to get through the CDOT and Federal Highway Administration process, but it was a good outcome, and it at least helps us maybe get this project moving again. So maybe with that, if Scott didn't have anything else, we'll take some questions.
I'm I'm sure they have plenty of questions or thoughts about this. Patrick, Phase 2 would be somewhat similar to Phase 1, but because it's a larger bite, you're wondering what would be required? Would that be an explanation of that?
Yeah, we're hoping that the Phase 2 could reutilize most of the traffic data that was collected during Phase 1, but Phase 2 is going to look specifically at the hook ramps as one of the infrastructure improvements. So there's going to be quite a bit more direct impact to the interstate system. So there's quite a few more environmental categories that need to be analyzed and reviewed to see what the environmental impact is of the hook ramps. And we do have Parsons Brinkerhoff here also who helped us with Phase 1, and of course Scott can help answer these questions too. But I think that was correct, right? Scott? And Jim, please, you can go to the mic if you'd like to provide some comments.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is Phase 1 really involved the extension of what they call Cabela's Drive from just north of where the La Quinta Good Times restaurant is to north just to approximately where the 40th Street underpass would intersect what they call Cabela's Drive. And most of that infrastructure did not really even though it was in the original environmental assessment approved by CDOT and FHWA, it was internal to the site, so it didn't really touch CDOT's facilities like these hook ramps will. So a lot of the effort for Phase 2 with the hook ramps is really, excuse me, trying to coordinate those hook ramps and all their potential impacts with FHWA and CDOT. They'll have a much more heightened and focused interest in Phase 2 because it has more direct potentially impacts to their operations of I-70 and along with the environmental impacts. So we really have to look at both. So that you're right, that Phase 2 does have.
Thank you for that. Mr. Pond.
Well, a couple things. First of all, thank you, everyone. Welcome to Wheat Ridge. Stick around, please. Duration, what's the expected timeframes for this?
For the Phase 2?
Yeah.
Tyler's grimacing back there. Tyler's time frame and Evergreen's time frame, I mean, they would like to close by the end of this year on properties, I believe, and I'll let him speak to this, and get started at the first of the year. But
I wish it was that fast, Patrick.
Yeah. Go ahead. Then I was just gonna say real quickly, but the CDOT process may take up to a year, but we're hoping we can crunch that down.
Yeah, it'll depend partially upon how much of the prior EA we can reuse, and different consultants have different takes on that. But it's ranging anywhere right now from 9 months to 16 months to go through the CDOT process. Our closing would be next year, and our hope is that by the time we're ready to close, that we've gone through the process, we're permitted with CDOT, and we can launch into construction on the project by next fall. Now, dovetailing with this is Denver Water is doing a major infrastructure replacement of they've got the main straw that we're all drinking from runs right through the property, and there's actually 2 straws. They're going to be replacing one of them. And so that will also be occurring next year and into 2018. So we're kind of dovetailing our work with Denver Water, but the hope is to be under construction by next fall to start opening up retailers by the fall of 18. Nothing happens fast in real estate.
No, that was a thumbs up. Is that what that was?
He got his answer, I think.
Yes. I got my answer.
And it made you happy?
Well, as happy as we can be, right?
Yeah.
We
Other
want it to
questions
go
or
faster.
comments from council? None? You don't even want to know what the entertainment is? I do. Who's going to ask that? Yeah.
That's good. Oh, that's good. I hesitated to ask this because it was pretty soon in the process, but do you have any idea what kind of tenants you're going to have?
Yeah, I can tell you the categories of the uses we've had interest from, and it's been pretty strong, actually. obviously, we need a large sales tax producer to drive the bonds, and that's still part of the project. But we've had a lot of interest from hotels, which is great because you guys have a great bed tax, we've noticed. We've had a lot of interest from restaurants. We're in discussions with an entertainment user that I'm under some pretty strict confidentiality with. They have another location in the metro area, and they're working on a second, and it would be, I think, very desirable for the city, and we can share more offline.
I don't even know some of this.
Batter doesn't even know. And we also actually have a large employer who's interested in doing a campus on the property, which would great high-paying jobs. And I'm under actually 2 confidentiality agreements with that one. So again, we're at the point where we've got enough interest where this engine actually is ready to cook. But the goal is to have an entertainment area, hospitality area, have what we call an entertainment area, where there's a restaurant entertainment cluster, and then we'll have an employment and a multifamily area. So it's going to be literally a true mixed-use deal with every food group out there, hopefully.
Well, we probably are not interested in going forward, right? Other questions, because we have to.
Our next step would be, as I mentioned, to review the traffic engineering proposals we received, and then come back for approval for that contract as soon as possible. And again, we don't know what the exact cost is right now, but obviously we'll try to keep it as low as possible. Mr. Matthews.
Mr. Matthews.
Just a question on this. Do we have anything in the budget for this right now?
We don't. We'll look at the CIP budget to see if there's anything that we can steal from this year's budget. Otherwise, it would have to come from reserves.
Don't consider it deal breaker. I just like to know where we're
Sure.
at.
Yep. We'll look at that closely. There might be some monies left over in a project that maybe our asphalt project or something. There were some cost savings, but we'll look into that so we don't have to dip into reserves if possible.
So you do need a consensus, or are you waiting till you come back with some of these cost estimates?
We don't necessarily need a consensus on this tonight. We'll bring back, it'll be an action item on a next agenda. So you can make your decision at that point. Unless you don't want us to move forward, and you can give us a consensus not to do that, and we'll stop what we're doing.
So it's information only at this point.
Zach Scott.
Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor.
Certainly, Mr. Urban.
Definitely move forward on this. I think that's a smart way to go. As it relates to the phase 2, previously did we do a phase 2 on the environmental assessment?
We didn't. It was one process, and I think that it was record time. Jim was with CDOT, I think, at the time, and the EA that was done, I think the full EA was done in almost just a year, wasn't it? So it was one phase, and it looked at the whole site at that time, and it was looking at up to 1 million square feet of retail. As Tyler mentioned, Cabela's was at one point proposing close to 1 million square of retail.
Okay. And so is there anything in the proposals from the traffic engineers as it relates to how this second phase of the EA can be done so that it's less expensive, or how we're considering it? Or?
Yeah, one of the things the consultant will be looking at is, what was actually approved back in 2007 as far as access agreements with CDOT, Federal Highway. A lot of those authorizations were attained at that time. So we're kind of hoping that, we don't have to reinvent the wheel so much, that a lot of those are still applicable, and we can move forward without a lot of that process that was done back then.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Matthews.
Yay.
Yay. All right. Ms. Hoppy.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you and welcome to Wheat Ridge, and we really appreciate the work you guys are putting forward to this area. It has been important to a lot of our citizens that we're able to move forward in this, so thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you
Scott.
very much.
Thanks, Tyler, Erica.
Delightful seeing you all. See what we can come up with here. I want to know where those hook ramps are going to be. I just can't figure them out.
When you're going west, they just go into the site like here.
Oh, they just pull right into it.
Yeah, and then to get out, you come back here.
Because I was trying to figure out with 32nd being so crowded,
It keeps them off of 32nd.
It keeps them off?
Yeah.
Because they were talking about 27th. I was reading that in there, and I went, who the heck are these things?
Next item is residential development standards, and we have Ken Johnstone and staff, I believe.
Yeah, Zach's here as well.
Oh, there he is. Zach, sorry. Didn't see him behind him, but I'll let Ken introduce the item. Well, I guess we still have, maybe Janelle needs to. Her recorder's on, so you could probably start.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Council. I appreciate being here to talk about this topic and certainly appreciate the comments from the citizens at the start of the meeting. I think in the past several years, as Council is well aware, we've been fortunate in a lot of ways to see a significant amount of infill residential development. We think this is, great investment and is generally a very positive trend, consistent with the goals and recommendations from the Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy and our city's comprehensive plan. The NRS strongly encouraged in both new market rate housing as well as investments in our existing housing stock, and we're really seeing a good mix of both. Similar, the city's comprehensive plan strongly encourages infill residential development and diversification of our housing stock. And it also places a high value on maintaining our established residential neighborhoods as well. So all equally important goals. Having said that, we're certainly also well aware that it's appropriate to ensure that infill residential development does fit in with an established neighborhood. And in that regard, as I think Council is aware, we have heard some concerns in the past several months over the scale of some of the development that has occurred in some of these infill residential projects, particularly on the east side of town. I think is where we've seen more of that concern, which is probably the smaller scale in terms of residential development side of the city. So because of the feedback, we did take the initiative to conduct some research into what some of our adjacent jurisdictions do to see, where we are in line with them in terms of building heights, in terms of a concept called bulk plane, which we'll spend some time speaking to tonight, as well as setbacks. So kind of the core basic residential development standards, building height, setbacks, and bulk plane, which is a new concept to Wheat Ridge. So Zach Wallace has taken the lead in conducting that research and analysis. I'm going to turn it over to him to communicate some of what we've learned and some of where we think might make sense to head in terms of moving forward with some possible regulatory changes.
Hi, Zach.
Thanks, Ken. Okay. So as Ken mentioned, I'm just going to run through a quick presentation. Sure. I'm going to run through basically a presentation that summarizes a lot of what is in the memo, but I think a lot of it might need some clarification, and then obviously I'll answer some questions. This is just a way for us to kind of see what other communities are doing, because other communities are facing similar challenges, and maybe help us kind of inform a path forward, maybe, depending on if you like what you see or not. So as Ken mentioned, we've been seeing an increase in residential redevelopment and infill projects, and we've been receiving a lot of inquiries about these residential projects, especially how they relate to neighborhood character, so especially architecture, setbacks, and height, as many of the neighbors mentioned. Unfortunately, we don't regulate architecture for single-family and duplexes, and a lot of these developments are single-family homes. What we do regulate is setbacks and height, as Ken mentioned. So those are mainly what we looked at when we looked at our surrounding communities. There is a maximum height on residential development of 35 feet, and this was actually adopted when the city incorporated in 1969. So it hasn't changed. It's always been 35 feet. So quickly, we looked at residential zone districts in Arvada, Denver, Edgewater, and Lakewood. We thought this was a good sample to start out with. Since they're close by to us, we thought that some of the zone districts nearest to us might have similar development patterns, as well as similar reinvestment patterns that we've been seeing in Wheat Ridge. Just a quick item to note, Denver has a lot of different zone districts, like a lot. So we just looked at the ones just on the other side of Sheridan, since we figured that might be some of the similar development and similar redevelopment. So we looked just at that. And then Lakewood recently rewrote its zoning code, and they added a lot of mixed-use zone districts. We didn't look at those because those are not really relatable to our residential zone districts, so we stuck with their straight residential zone districts. So just quick findings on setbacks. We found that we're mostly in line with our neighboring communities. There's a great big table somewhere in your agenda packet that summarizes all of that. There's one exception. The R1C zone district is a 5-foot rear setback, and that is much more permissive than any of the surrounding neighborhoods or surrounding communities. It's actually the smallest rear yard setback of all the zone districts we looked at. And something to note is that Edgewater and Denver offer reduced setbacks for properties with alleys, but even that goes to 8 feet. And the reason that I bring this up is because the R1C is mostly on the east side of town where there are alleys. So there are ways of adding in those things, like maybe a 10-foot setback or 8 feet if on an alley, something like that. There's flexibility. Now we'll move into the height findings. They're a little more complex than the setback findings. Most municipalities around us have a 35-foot maximum. Denver, the zone district closest to us, actually have a 30-foot maximum. Where Wheat Ridge is the outlier is in some additional height restrictions. All the other municipalities that we looked at have additional height restrictions, either in the form of bulk plain or a transitional height zone. And so since we're going to be talking about bulk plain, I just wanted to throw up a quick SketchUp model so we can, just in case anyone hasn't been introduced to this topic before, typically what we, is this a pointer? So essentially in this drawing, this box at the bottom would be a property line, and then how a bulk plane works is it extends up from the property line at some specified height, which typically we saw differing between cities and zone districts depending on their location. And then it begins to extend over the property at a 45-degree angle until you reach the maximum allowed height. So it essentially creates a box over the property in which the development can't intersect. So quickly, what we found in Arvada is that they do a height restriction for multifamily and non-residential structures that are within 100 feet of single-family detached or attached structures. And it either limits the height of the multifamily or non-residential structure to the height of the adjacent single-family home, or enforces a bulk plane that begins at the property line and goes at a 45-degree angle over. So it seemed like it was an either or. You could choose one or the other. The developer could choose one or the other. Edgewater enforces a bulk plane on all of its properties. So on R1, R2, R3, which are very similar to Wheat Ridge's R1, R2, R3, kind of low density, low intensity residential. The bulk plane begins at 15 feet above the property line and then extends over at a 45-degree angle. On its higher intensity residential and commercial uses, it begins at 35 feet above the property line and then begins to extend over. And where the higher intensity meets the lower intensity, which I tried to draw in here, it's a 15-foot. The 15-foot applies to both properties. Denver has a bit more of a complex. I took all these photos, by the way, from the municipality zoning codes. So Denver's is a little more complex than Edgewater's, but it's essentially the same concept. This C right here is essentially the height up from the property line, and then the 1/1 is the 45-degree angle over the property. One thing to note is Edgewater measures all of these bulk planes, measures the bulk plane from all property lines, whereas Denver just does it from the sides. So that's just one thing to note. Finally, Lakewood is similar to Arvada in that they have a transitional height zone for their mixed-use commercial and industrial zone districts adjacent to residential zone districts. And this limits the height of structures in the mixed-use zone districts to the allowed height in the residential zone district. So if it's 35 feet allowed in the residential zone district, then for the first 75 feet of this mixed-use property, it needs to maintain 35 feet, even if more is allowed. And all that's in your memo. I just wanted to go over it quickly for clarification. So what I did is I applied these different standards to just kind of a typical house that we might be seeing develop in Wheat Ridge. Kind of a small lot, single family, utilizing the 3-story maximum or 35-foot maximum. So the first one we have here would be applying Denver's suburban bulk plain, which begins at 10 feet above the property line. So the areas shaded in gray would be the areas that are outside of the bulk plain. So if Denver's suburban bulk plain standards were applied to this house, much of the 3rd story and actually a significant portion of the 2nd story would be impacted by the bulk plain. This is Denver's urban bulk plain, which begins at 17 feet, so 7 feet higher before it starts to extend over at a 45-degree angle. Less impactful on the 2nd floor, but still impacts the 3rd floor quite significantly. This is Edgewater's, which is kind of in between Denver's. It begins at 15 feet. Again, a little bit on the 2nd floor, and then it impacts a lot of the 3rd floor. So essentially, if this developer wanted to build this house, they would need to start coming over instead of extending straight up. And finally, applying Lakewood and Arvada's transitional height zones would not impact this property as it's single family surrounded by single family. 35 feet is allowed. And this is another one, maybe like a 2.5-story house with, meeting the minimum setbacks on the sides. Denver's suburban bulk plain of 10 feet impacts a pretty large portion of the 2nd story in this kind of maybe 2nd and a half or 3rd story, whatever you want to call that. Denver's urban bulk plain, which begins at 17 feet, just kind of takes a little bit off of the 3rd floor and a little bit off the 2nd floor there. Edgewater's 15 feet is again just a little bit in between those, affecting mostly the 3rd floor and this portion of the 2nd floor. And then again, Lakewood and Arvada's transitional height zones would not impact this property as it's a single family house. So I think we would like to know if you would like us to move forward with bulk plain research or consideration of setback requirements, things like that. I think this is just discussion time now.
So we're looking at consideration of bulk plain possibilities there, as well as setbacks. All right, Mr. Matthews.
Thank you. I'd like to make some general comments, and irregardless of whether we put bulk planes in or not. For the last 2 or 3 years, since I've really been interested in Wheat Ridge government and becoming informed, I've been hearing time and time again that we need more affordable housing. And if we allow people to build these $500,000 houses in a small neighborhood, we're just cutting our own throats. My wife had the pleasure of being a volunteer for the garden tour, and she was up at 41st and Ames, and beautiful bungalow neighborhood. What we would probably call, and I don't mean this in any way, but smaller homes or starter homes or affordable houses. And right next to this little bungalow, and this is in Mountain View, by the way, 2 3-story buildings. And Carol said that everyone that came by just said, "Oh, what a shame. We've just ruined the ambience of this neighborhood." It's an older neighborhood, beautiful, mature landscaping, and it's our affordable housing stock for our city. And so to allow these bigger houses in the middle and out of place with another neighborhood like that, I think would just be a shame. I'll make comments later, but I'd like everyone to think about that we're kind of, if we want to maintain affordable housing, why let them go into an existing neighborhood and build something entirely out of character with the neighborhood? So I think there should be some consideration here of the character of the existing neighborhood and not just a flat, straight, height requirement.
Okay, Ms. Davis?
I have a question, and it's more of an example of a development. So, for instance, because, I mean, I like the idea of the bulk plane because at least it doesn't sit on top of a house. And the ones I'm thinking of is Incarnation, how there's that small little neighborhood and then poof, right there. That's under our current codes that they could build that way, correct? So
That's correct,
the
yeah.
bulk plane would have helped in that situation?
We analyzed that a little bit, and if I recall correctly, it would have required some modifications to that building. Not huge modifications, but some.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Because I guess going in the direction, sort of in the direction of Mr. Matthews is, I do agree. I mean, I think that's for instance, my house is kind of a longer ranch, so something set on top of it is not as daunting as, the little bungalow, and then all of a sudden you have, something right next to it that's taking over their whole backyard, their, what they felt was a quaint backyard, and those types of things. So I just wanted to get a better example. I'd just be curious what that bulk plane would look like in that situation, if it would change it a lot, or if it wouldn't change it very much. And maybe I can get together with you just to get a better idea of it offline. But
Yeah, and depending on the direction from council tonight, if any of this moves forward, we'd be able to do more analysis like that and provide more illustrative information for city council and planning commission.
Ms. Wooden?
Thank you. Just for discussion as far as describing to us what we're looking at here, could you tell us a little bit about R1 versus R1C?
R1 is predominantly located, it's our largest lot zoning, so it's a minimum 12,000 square foot lots or 12,500. It's predominantly on the western side of town.
Okay.
R1C is kind of a small lot, single family zoning. So it only allows single family, but it's designed for more like 5,000 to 6,000 square foot lots. Hence the reduced setbacks to accommodate the fact that you're dealing with less property.
And then what is RC1? Is that the same?
RC, restricted commercial? RC1?
Yeah.
There's R1C, that's a residential district that we just described.
Oh, right,
There's
okay.
RC, which is restricted commercial. That's kind of a neighborhood scale commercial zoning.
Okay. I understand. Okay, and then my other question is, I just wanted to double check. I believe in the beginning of the presentation, you said the 35-foot height was when the city was established. Is that correct? So that's been an ordinance ever since the city was?
Correct.
Okay, and that we are in accordance with most of our neighbors as far as the height?
With the exception of Denver, which in proximity to Wheat Ridge has the 30-foot maximum.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm those. Thanks.
Mr. Fitzgerald?
On topic, I just want to say that I would be in favor of studying bulk plane, and I'd be in favor of moving the rear 5-foot setback forward. Now, I'm sorry for all the laterals tonight, but I think that coupled with that is the whole design thing, because if you go in some Denver neighborhoods, you are confronted with this modern structure that is totally out of sync with the rest of the neighborhood. I don't know exactly if we can do that, and I know we have no design standards, but I think we ought to start thinking about design standards.
Ms. Hoppy?
I would be in favor of looking at bulk plane limitations. One thing I'd like to say about design standards, though, is that it's kind of like art. So while you might think that house is very ugly, the person who paid lots and lots of money for it does not think it's very ugly. So I would just say that we should be a little bit careful about imposing design standards on people. It would be like saying, well, we can only have oil paintings in all of our buildings. So. But, and as far as I want to ask you, the rear setback from 5 to 10, for which one were you looking at on that? I'm trying to,
We're proposing that for R1C, though I think if we get direction to move forward looking at these issues, we might want to look at a couple. We also have a lot of rear yard setbacks that are 10 feet in a lot of our districts, and I think that's worth exploring a little more. It's not necessarily out of line with other communities, but that also was one of the issues relative to, you know, Incarnation in terms of where they located structures on that property.
and I would also be in favor of looking at the bulk plane limits on all edges of the property rather than just the sides.
Could you repeat that?
Well, in Denver, they just do the side properties. They start their bulk plane, and then in Edgewater, they do all of them. But what I know from some of our properties is, like with my property, I have 7 neighbors. And so that would be, you know, something to consider, where some properties have just the alley on the back or just the one house on the back. So I think that it would be all right to look at the surrounding.
Applying it to all sides?
I do want to go on record to say I don't want to squash development in Wheat Ridge. I think it's really important that we get nice, high-quality construction in our town.
You know, I do too. I think it's very important that we don't want to squash it, and yet we do need to be sensitive to whether it's working, whether it's keeping some standards for our citizens. My concern is some designs would suffer from bulk plane, although I like the concept, would suffer. Some of the simpler, more contemporary designs, which are based on square, they would have to work a little bit to accommodate that. Mr. Wren.
I want to thank everyone that came up and spoke this morning, or this afternoon. What I mainly heard was the citizens want to keep the character of the neighborhoods. They want us to remember that there is multi-generational people living here, multi-income, and they just want to keep their, you know, the quaint feel of our community. That's why we moved here. One thing Edgewater has done recently is they reduced their height along Sheridan to 25 feet. In order not to block Sloan's Lake and the views downtown. But we're also Wheat Ridge, so we're not Denver, we're not Edgewater, we're not Arvada. So I would like us, as long as we're going to be looking at the bulk plane, I'd like us to also consider and look at limiting the height to 25 feet. That's one thing the citizens have asked for. I don't think it hurts to take that into consideration and look at that while we're trying to have this discussion. And just remember that why we moved to Wheat Ridge, what we like about living here in Wheat Ridge, and how we can just grow, not infringe on anybody's rights to improve their property and where they're living, but also to be smart about it and to just make sure that we're considering everybody's concerns. One other thing I want to mention, and I've tried to find the minutes or at least the outcome of that meeting from 2012. I have not been able to. I don't know if staff has a report on the outcome of that meeting. I know the meeting happened, which we confirmed, but do we have a report on that?
I don't know if it was that exact meeting either. I mean, you know, we found reports of at least 2 meetings that we've had at Sons of Italy, but you know, those were city council strategic planning retreats, so I can't confirm or deny if one of those meetings was what the gentleman was at and who spoke to him. So you know, the only thing I can think of is during the whole height and density discussion, you know, I know there was a lot of folks that said they didn't want any changes in the neighborhoods, that, you know, increasing the heights in the commercial districts wouldn't impact neighborhoods. So I don't know if that's what somebody said to him. I don't know. You know, that's impossible for us to comment on, really.
Right, I was just trying to, this was confirmed by Jerry DiTullio. He had said he had, you know, attended this meeting and these were the discussions. Maybe I couldn't find minutes, but at least a report from the outcome. So that's what I was trying to track down and have not been able to. But
you know, I remember that meeting.
Do you?
It was
a community meeting?
It was a community meeting with tables.
Invited, yeah.
Were
I wasn't on
tables of
council
people,
then.
and they brought up
You
several
were at
things.
it. You were at
But I
the-
went.
your
I
name-
wasn't on
Yeah,
council.
your name was on the list.
Mhm.
I don't know if the gentleman's was. I didn't look up. But yeah, that was a strategic planning meeting. I think council invited specific people to come and provide input on council strategic planning. So I don't know if height and density came up that night, but I don't think there was any council members there to speak to citizens. So I don't know if that was the meeting either that this gentleman was at. So, you know, you know, just can't respond to it. I just don't know who spoke to him.
Yeah, what I remember is council, there was council there. It wasn't like a formal thing, and they talked about a lot of things, from sidewalks in neighborhoods to,
Trash.
like what you would like changed. If we have this much in our budget, how would you like it to be used, type of thing. So there was a lot of different topics, and probably depending on the table that you were sitting at, I know we talked a lot about sidewalks and stuff, so I know there was various topics in that I recollect.
Okay, I just want to validate the fact, I mean, I wasn't there and I wasn't on council at the time, but was it Al? Yes. Okay, I just wanted to validate the fact that he attended a meeting, this is what he heard, and just to, give confirmation that did occur. I think if we could just remember that I know we're comparing, Denver, Arvada, Edgewater, Lakewood, what they're doing, but we are unique. And if we could just keep that and consider, 25-foot heights along with the bulk plane, just kind of look at the full picture before we make a decision, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
May I ask, if when you refer to 25-foot heights, are you talking about changing, like moving into an existing neighbor, not looking at our charter and changing our charter position?
Well, that would be a charter change, wouldn't it, if we changed the
It'd be a
25-foot limit?
code
A code
change,
change?
code change,
A code change? Okay.
Wouldn't be a charter change?
No, code change.
In certain situations. Okay. Mr. Matthews.
Something I'd also like us to keep in mind too, I mean, we are, looking at some of these really nice neighborhoods, but also as a transition on the edge of neighborhoods, where if the subdivision, if I'll call it a subdivision for right now, but a neighborhood ends here, and then across the property line, it maybe becomes a different zone. I'd like to see something as far as for transition, so that someone doesn't build a 5-story apartment house right next to the residential neighborhood, that you have some transition, kind of a neighborhood bulk plane, if you would, so that you don't all of a sudden overpower these residential homes. And I would be in favor of, in general, a maximum of 25 feet. And or if there's an existing neighborhood, that's where it gets a little sticky. If there's an existing neighborhood where all of the homes are more than 25 feet, if we're matching the neighborhood, I don't think we should also make someone build a small home, smaller or shorter home.
Mr. Pond. I'm sorry, were you done, Mr. Matthews? Mr. Pond. Councilmember.
Thank you. Thanks for the work. I think this is a really important topic, like many of the ones that we've been bringing up. And a couple of things. I want to come back around to the concept, just make a comment about the neighborhood revitalization plan. But I'm going to start with saying I do support bulk plan. I think it's a good tool. I would be open to looking at it on multiple sides or 4 sides of a property. I've had to apply Denver's codes most personally, so I'm more knowledgeable about those. So I feel like those have been effective. So I would like to see that moving forward. I think continuing on a height discussion is fine. I don't support one solution, and that's one thing I want us to be very careful about. We're trying to say we shouldn't compare ourselves to Lakewood, Arvada, Golden Ridge. We shouldn't compare neighborhoods within Wheat Ridge to other neighborhoods within Wheat Ridge when they're distinctly different. And in fact, I don't think that we can just apply, for instance, chopping 10 feet off of our codes. That actually could hurt character in certain neighborhoods or potential build out in certain neighborhoods. And I know from some of these conversations, including perhaps personally being part of some of the R1C conversations, I believe, that those discussions were really trying to provide what I think is reasonable property rights to folks. And in the case of that R1C, they have very, very small, narrow rectangular lots. And that's a typical, or can be typical in certain areas, but that's not ubiquitous over this city. In fact, I live in a place that doesn't have rectangular lots at all. And there's a lot of places right around us here in this building that do not have small rectangular lots. They actually have small, polygons or whatever, or large polygons, or something that's different. And I think that we need to understand that as well. In fact, if we're going to continue to talk about honoring the character, our character, we have to understand that we have different characters, and that I'm all for it. Let's honor our character, but let's not like honor our character in one section of the city that then all of a sudden inadvertently puts on restrictions to other characteristics that are important in other areas. And so I'm happy to continue to talk about this. I agree that bulk plane is probably a great way to talk about it. I'm willing to continue to talk about height changes. I don't think 35 to 25 is would be something that I would support citywide, but perhaps I would in certain areas. But again, that's the type of conversation we probably have to get into: is it feasible for us to actually look at more of a granular look? Can we actually do that on a code basis? Can we do that can we apply that code in that way? I don't know. So that's something that I think moving forward I'd be interested in talking about. I wanted to just close with saying that I do think that a lot of these things start to we keep referencing, and we have many weeks here for many different reasons, the NRS. I think it's really important as things move forward and we get into these hard topics. I believe we should be talking about the NRS, whether or not it needs to be refreshed, whether it's still an important guiding document to us, because that direction, which is a little bit old anyway, is coupled with the comp plan and some of the ways that we've and then some of these actual issues that we're dealing with, that maybe we could are the practical application of these things that we did. I think all of those things we need to kind of touch back. There's a lot of work that was done in those, but perhaps if something is stale or needs to be refreshed, we need to look at that, because we keep going back and kind of using these as resources for making decisions, which is right as long as we feel like those are up to date.
Any other comments? Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would be in favor of using some kind of bulk plane methodology to devise some sort of compromise. I think that a 35 feet height restriction in most areas of the city are appropriate, given that most of the surrounding municipalities have that as their limit, as well as that it's worked for the city since our inception. And in certain circumstances, maybe it's acceptable or appropriate to reduce that, but I'd have to look at that and see, based on zoning, what that would consider and what circumstances would cause us to restrict that, and how that would be sort of devised. And when we start looking at smaller lot sizes and bulk planes, how does that consider that height restrictions? And as we look at sort of some of those overlays and seeing how that it impacts that, I think that's something to consider. But I think that as it stands, using the bulk plane methodology is a good way to go, and I would probably stick to close to the 35 feet as possible in most areas, and I'd be willing to look at this on a case-by-case basis, but I think I'd like to look at this a little bit further.
Ms. Davis.
So just to kind of tag on to what Mr. Urban was saying, I think, is it my understanding that like the bulk plane, especially with smaller lots, would condense that 35 feet down automatically, because it's smaller, so it's going more like this than this. So it would kind of take into consideration, right, that it might not be able to be built to 35 feet because of if you do the bulk plane, I mean, you might only be able to get it to 27.
Yeah, I think on smaller lots, effectively, you make it difficult to do an efficient third story, right?
Yeah.
So if you can only have a couple hundred feet up there, are you really going to go to the construction cost effort of going up to that third story on smaller lots?
Right.
I do hear council considering this very carefully, and I appreciate that, because in addition to low-cost housing or lower-income housing, we also need to think in terms of that we do have areas that we want to bring up, so that, once again, we have some of those stronger households coming in. So we kind of don't want to cut off our spider face. Right. So I'm appreciating your good consideration about all of this. Certainly.
So the bulk plane, you could still have the highest point being 35 feet, but that would be the point, correct?
Right.
With that 45-degree angle. So that would
Right.
at least, instead of being a box,
It would.
it's correct. It's going to be more like this.
And the whole intent of that is to allow more light, right? In
Correct.
to the sides, right, and airflow and such.
As well as not being so big and menacing almost to a
Right.
smaller home close by.
Okay, thank you.
So I basically heard the consensus to continue really looking at all of these aspects, the bulk plane, the setbacks, and some discussion about height in maybe differing characters, different neighborhoods based on character, and so, is that what you heard, Ken?
It is, and if I could just add to that, we're glad to keep moving forward on all three of those topics. I think in our kind of analysis, we think the bulk plane and the setbacks are probably the easiest to deal with, as has been alluded to here. So our request would be to begin to work with the Planning Commission on drafting some regulations for them to consider through a study session and then public hearings, and then get that back in front of you, you all as well. The height is more complicated simply because, we've got 10 different residential districts. They are in all different kind of geographic locations throughout town. There's probably a couple different approaches to how one might consider amending our height regulations. Is it on a zone district basis? Is it on a neighborhood overlay basis, where you define different overlays, where even though the underlying zoning says 35 feet for that neighborhood, it's 32 or 25 or whatever that may be. Once you start getting into that sort of a discussion, I think you want to reach out to those. And it's frankly just a much bigger property impact. I mean, if someone has been saving up to build their 3-story house for years and years, and all of a sudden it's a 2-story house, I think that deserves to be a conversation with property owners, so that we know if we're considering that type of a change, it's more impactful.
So we could potentially bring just the bulk plane and the setbacks back separately, because those could have some pretty big impacts on helping some of these issues that we've been hearing, and then have a longer discussion about the height. Is that okay if we do those separately?
And we could start the conversation with the Planning
Yeah,
Commission
we'll
about
start
height
it.
as well. It's
We
just
might have an ordinance to talk about bulk
Exactly.
plane and setbacks first before we get into anything on height.
I think.
Yeah. Somebody had a second.
And on the bulk plane issue, I noticed in the Denver example there was a 10-foot example used on the areas closer to Harlan and 48th Avenue, and then in Edgewater there's a 15-foot example, in other places it's 17 feet. So I'd like us to look at something in that neighborhood of 10 to 17 feet, as in some kind of approximation of that. Might be a good place to start.
Councilmember Davis.
Just one more thing. May I ask, when we bring some of the things back, is it possible to use real-life examples? Like, so to take a picture? Because I don't think sometimes you realize the impact until, I think like Incarnation, you don't realize it until it's up and built, that you're like, whoa. So is there a way that we could take, maybe a smaller lot and picture and, kind of what that would look like versus, just so we can see it from the
Good
eye.
idea.
I mean, I know we had these drawings and stuff, but sometimes it's easier to
What that
see.
means when you take it off.
Yeah.
Good idea. Councilmember.
Can I ask that we use like architecturals, because I would really hate to be watching this study session and see my house up there and be like, oh, look at this crappy house that we want to put these bulk plane things on. But there's architectural plans that we can use instead of like my neighbor's house or my house or anything.
I have just a comment regarding the architectural comments that were made. I think we should tread very carefully and very lightly on that topic. As to charming means one thing to someone and completely different to someone else. And if you look at some of our current neighborhoods, you have traditional homes right next to a mid-century modern home. And that architecture is very different. Flat roofs, different windows, and it's very different than a traditional home. I really think we should be quite careful when we talk about architectural standards that we will allow and that we think will fit a neighborhood. Because if we want development to continue and if we want to encourage people to move here and develop and things like that, we have to be very careful in that arena. And right now we have housing stock that is very diverse, and we should continue that and respect that at some level. Now, I don't know what that level is, but we should have a separate discussion on architectural standards.
Thank you for that. Anyone else? Nope.
Great, thanks, folks. Thanks, Zach. Ken?
Okay, our last is occupancy limits. Kenneth, oh, we have,
We do, we got the chief.
we got the chief still, huh?
Pilot seat. Maybe we'll let, looks like the audience. Okay, Ken?
Ready?
I'll let you introduce it, yeah.
Well, this is a new topic to us all, so we'll try and get our way through it. It's a relatively complex topic, certainly a long memo, but I'll try and get it started here. The title, obviously, of the agenda item is residential occupancy limits, and that's certainly a big part of what we want to discuss tonight. But I think probably it's really part of some bigger policy issues just related generally around residential neighborhood code enforcement issues and that program out of the police department. We kind of partner very closely on code enforcement issues and all these issues that are covered in the memo. So this agenda item is also intended to be partially responsive to concerns raised in a June 6th memo from some neighbors in the area of 38th and Hoyt, which, as many of you are likely aware, has been an area where we've had some recent code enforcement activities as well. There were some discussions in that memo that we wanted to be responsive to. It's a complicated issue, obviously multifaceted. We're trying just to kind of tee up the topic for discussion, understanding that these are complicated issues that we're not going to completely figure out tonight, but want to get the conversation started. Just in general, I think code enforcement in the last several years has become a higher city council policy priority. We think that's been a good thing. We've implemented a number of different programs, from dumpster days to the East Wheat Ridge initiatives to the TLC program that we've been working on at council's direction over the last several years. And we've been, I think, very successful in taking a more proactive approach to some of our nuisance code enforcement issues in a variety of neighborhoods across the city, and we feel like that's been largely successful. And we think it's important. I think not to harp too much on the neighborhood revitalization strategy, but I think it kind of consciously said that we wanted to look at ourselves as a community and make sure that we were kind of keeping up with the times and maintaining a good community aesthetic. So we think those are important policy issues still. And they promote strong neighborhoods, which is the ultimate goal, I think, of the NRS. We're seeing, I think, as we mentioned earlier, results in a lot of infill residential development, remodels, new single-family homes, residential additions, and we think that's been a good thing. But people don't make investments oftentimes if they aren't seeing well-maintained properties, right? So I think the ultimate result of a good code enforcement program is that you see people making neighborhood reinvestments. Confidence in the market, I think, is intimately related to a good code enforcement program. We've obviously, as council aware, had some staffing issues in code enforcement program recently, so we've gone to, at least temporarily, to more of a reactive mode, but we think a good, solid, proactive code enforcement program is a good thing, and we want to restaff up and make sure we can continue moving forward in that direction. The related issue and the reason for the title of the memo is there have been some concerns with just potentially residents being kind of over-occupied and that having, spillover effects, that there are an excessive number of people residing in a house or apartment or whatever the unit might be, and that has spillover effects. We have some occupancy issues in place. They reside in 2 places in the code. In the zoning code, in terms of some of our definitions of families and rooming and boarding, and we went through kind of a variety of different sections of the code that relate to that. And then in the International Property Maintenance Code, which is really part of the adopted building codes. We did, those really limits are in place to ensure, in the case of the International Property Maintenance Code, public health and safety. In the case of the zoning code, it's really quality of life in established residential neighborhoods. As noted, we've had some challenges recently in enforcing some of those residential occupancy limitations. And that's just a challenging topic in general. I mean, there are important private property rights, trespass rights, constitutional rights that we have to be respectful of, and it makes it difficult in terms of enforcing maximum residential occupancy when that situation arises. We think that to a large part, the issues really relate to other things that are a spillover or a result of too many people arguably occupying a structure, such as yard trash, clutter, excessive vehicle parking, vehicles parking on unimproved surfaces. And we have the code enforcement tools, notwithstanding staffing issues temporarily, I think to achieve good code enforcement with some of those root issues that I think are what are of concern to a neighborhood in terms of appearance and impacts. That said, we did want to kind of, to the topic, make some suggestions in terms of tools that could be considered to make enforcement of residential occupancy as kind of a fundamental issue more enforceable. And we can talk about those. They're obviously in the memo, but we can talk about them in more detail if that's a direction. So really, I think the first fundamental question is, does City Council think that just that core number of how many people can occupy a certain size structure, is that a fundamental issue that you want to address, or is it really more these other code enforcement issues? So we can talk about that as the discussion moves on. As a related matter, we did bring up the topic of multifamily rental registration and inspection program, and we've talked about council, not with this council per se, but with other councils, previous councils, and some of you about this topic on a couple occasions before. To the extent that you think that there's a causal link there, that rental properties are disproportionately having code enforcement issues, I think we could bring that topic up as a topic that we could talk further with you. Certainly some communities have programs that require rental properties to be registered and inspected in some sort of a periodic manner. So there are models out there that we could look at, and that was some of the suggestions, again, that was in that June 6th memo from, or initial citizen kind of a petition that was submitted to City Council back on June 6th. We're not necessarily arguing for that, though we certainly believe that arguments could be made that having that kind of conversation and relationship with rental properties, could be a tool that would make for more effective nuisance code enforcement as well. So that's kind of the topics that we wanted to bring to you tonight. Again, acknowledging that it's kind of a new topic for us, so we're just, I think, hoping to get real initial direction in terms of what you think the issues are, or what tools we have or don't have, and then specifically if there's any interest in considering a multifamily registration inspection program. Obviously, Dan's here for a reason. His shop is in the driver's seat when it comes to actually being the field operatives on code enforcement, so he can speak to kind of some of those field issues as well. So, but that's it by way of introduction. I'm glad to start the conversation.
Ken, I get it that there's like 3 points, either that we want to look at number of residents in a dwelling, general code violations, and what that means, as well as some sort of inspection program. Yeah. Who wants to start on one of those? Miss Duran does.
Can you explain to me what the pilot program was that you had in 2009, and why was it just focused on the larger multifamily rental properties?
I don't recall a specific policy reason why we did it on just the larger ones, other than we knew that we had some problems specifically in some of those larger ones. And that seemed like a logical place to start. They have property managers. They're, as opposed to trying to track down, a 2-unit building that might, be harder to communicate with those tenants or with those landlords. So I think those are some of the reasons why we chose to do that. The pilot program, we reported back after we concluded it. It was about a year long, and talked about the potential for implementing that as a permanent program, and ultimately didn't get direction to do that.
I think I do remember too. There was quite a bit of discussion about to what level, how far, how many units to go below, and so I think the consensus or the compromise was to keep it above a certain number of units, so don't go to single family or even double or. What was it set at? Was there a number? I can't remember if it was.
So we felt, go ahead.
9 or 10 or something.
We had brought the issue, the discussion topic of a property inspection program to council. It talked about, some of the data that we were seeing, from a police department perspective, particularly with our large multifamily housing. Part of the discussion of the property inspection program dealt with large rental properties, multifamily rental properties, and then smaller rental properties. So, it's been our observation from a police department code enforcement perspective that many of the issues that we deal with, not all, but many of the issues that we deal with from a nuisance code enforcement perspective are with rental properties. And we have a number of older rental properties in our community that are large multifamily housing units. So the decision was made, to work with the fire department, to work with the building inspector, community service officers, to do something similar to what we do with our hotel motel program in terms of doing some annual inspections and actually set some of these up in our really large multifamily. So the Kipling Village, for instance, had been at one time a pretty problematic area from a calls for service perspective. So that was one area that we looked at and addressed, and did several really large ones, and then reported back to council in regards to, do you want to continue this? Do we want more of a program, where there'd be a registration process involved in that, a fee to help pay for the program, and ultimately council decided, that they didn't want to go in that direction, so the program was suspended. It really came down to a resource issue. We just don't have the resources to take on a rental inspection property or to do large multifamily housing inspections with personnel that we have, and some of the other direction that we've been given from a policy perspective by council.
Okay, so do you have the results of those you could email or access, you could just send to me?
I could certainly look
and see.
and see if we could find the staff report from that. There were issues that we came across in regards to problems not out of bounds per se from what we've seen with a lot of our hotels and motels from doing those inspection programs. But we've gotten, for instance, our hotels and motels are very aware now of those areas that code enforcement, the building inspector, the fire marshal look at, and we've been able to address some pretty significant health, welfare, and safety issues. So those are, I'm not saying they're pristine in the kind of places everybody would stay, but from a health, safety, and welfare perspective, they're much better than they were 12 years ago.
Sure, okay. All right, thank you.
I'll see if we can find that staff report, Ken.
Great, thank you.
Just to elaborate on that too, I think in terms of some of the challenges when we were trying to get, or council was trying to get consensus as to whether they wanted to move forward with something like that. I mean, there was a struggle with, what's the threshold? What's the number of units? Is it every single family home that's rented? Is it above 10? Is it above 50? There's some policy discussions you can have on, oftentimes the bigger ones can be better managed, right? Because they've got on-site managers, and so it's a complicated issue. Another big policy discussion was really, what are the issues that we're trying to get at? Is it exterior maintenance? Just how's it look? Make sure it doesn't look bad for someone driving by? Or do we want to focus quite a bit on the inside? And there was not real clear consensus on that either. In our experience in the pilot program, I mean, many of the issues are interior issues that are truly health safety.
Well, and yeah, and to take a little bit further, it's even more than health safety. It's impacting the rental rates in Wheat Ridge, which is something we're struggling with. And we're going to bring this forward to you here in a few weeks, but we did some updates on the NRS study and the demographics and the statistical information in there, and it still shows, I think there was one number in there, right, that our rental rate is still one of the lowest in the area, in the Jefferson County especially.
Ours is about $910 is our median rent in Wheat Ridge. In Jefferson County, this could be reflected by we have smaller units, though I don't think that's necessarily the case. But in Jefferson County, the average is $1,270. So,
and it's great to have low rent potentially, but it's also it impacts the new product that we can get. It's difficult for a developer to come in and build a new product because they can't get the rents that they need.
Well, I got a bunch of them. I do recall that when we were looking at those inspections, and there's some real tough decisions about looking at single-family homes, which is where we felt that the most work needed to be done. Very hard to monitor, very hard to accomplish. Who did I have go first there?
I'll just say something quick. I swear. So I was a part of the discussion, and I think that was my major concern, is that we were looking at more of the larger rental areas when, I'm not sure about everybody else, but when I walk and talk to folks and when I get calls, it's usually rental homes and not buildings. In fact, even in my neighborhood, just got a call Saturday that you can pick the 3 new rental houses in my neighborhood because of the multiple cars, boats, ski-doos, work trailers, all in the driveways, and then water, grass is not being watered and those types of things. So I think I think that was a lot of what the group that was here earlier, or, in June, that was talking about was, some of the homes that are, multiple rentals or who's renting. I think we have the whole Airbnb thing going on that we're not sure how that's working. And I do remember the other thing, which I do think is important, is life safety in some of these rental properties, because I don't think they're kept up well, and I don't think anyone deserves to live in a home that's unsafe or full of mold or poor electrical or anything like that. So I can see the need, but it's almost like it needs to be from 1 to
5
to 1 to 200. However, I don't think it's hard to limit it to one or the other. And I know from an aspect of staff and volume, and we can't do all of it. But I think it's a tough one.
One of the challenges that we talked about and faced when we talked about this in 2009, I believe, is we have some very responsible rental property owners in the community. They keep their properties updated. They keep, they're reasonable about keeping the outside and the interior appearance of the residents up to date. So how do we incentivize a property inspection program, for those who are responsible property owners versus those that are just pulling money out of the property and not reinvesting it? And I've got to tell you, as a police chief, one of the most difficult and challenging things, I have and I deal with on a day-to-day basis are code enforcement issues, primarily with rental properties, where they've just gotten out of control. The 38th and Hoyt is an example. We've got several others that we're dealing with one over on Marshall Street that's sort of been a chronic problem, and we've got them in other areas of the city. And it's challenging when you have all of these other nuisance code issues that are going on in the city that elected officials want dealt with, neighbors want dealt with. My boss wants those dealt with, and so you're responding to all of these needs, and then you have one that just sort of blows up and becomes a really time-intensive project for the organization. And the administrative model process that we've developed around code enforcement has certainly made it more efficient for us to deal with those issues and get a more timely resolution and outcome to those, but sometimes they get really, really complicated. And, so, having a way to sort of look at that, something that, is reasonable, I think, is something I think, as your police chief, that is a reasonable route to go down. I think it'll help us address some of these more problematic properties, but I also understand that there are some challenges with that and some pretty strong feelings around that. So, we're sort of looking for, direction on how you would like to proceed in all of these areas, so you don't get frustrated at our, perceived inability on our part maybe to deal with issues that are going on in the communities that you represent.
Mr. Fitzgerald.
I certainly would be in favor of some regulation as to the number of residents, the first part of this issue. But I have to say that I'm a landlord, as are others at this table. And I would have no objection to inspection of the exterior of a building for the appearance. I think that would be to the benefit of the city if we could assure that rental properties looked nice. But as to going further, I would be adamantly against that. I accept Section 8 and one other government program that requires an inspection once a year. And I can tell you the tenants think of that as an invasion of their privacy. They don't like it. And I understand that. The other thing is that those inspections can get to be a sort of a power trip on the part of the inspector and then become really nitpicky. And the danger there is that if you have an inspector that is creating bigger and bigger expenses, then the landlord may just say, well, I don't have to accept Section 8. I'll just not accept Section 8. And Larry is talking about affordable rental housing. I do want to raise rental rates in Wheat Ridge, but some of my tenants are older folks on retirement with retirement incomes, and I don't raise their rent very much, if at all, because I know they can't afford it. So I guess the bottom line is I see interior inspection as overly intrusive on the part of the city government, but I'm more than willing to have the exterior of a building inspected for appearance, sort of the broken window idea. So that's all I want to say. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews. I almost called him something else. Had to work at that. Go ahead.
I've really had an education into this process in the last couple of years, and never did initially understand the amount of work that has to go into the investigation into code enforcement and complaints. And everyone that goes on the website and wants to turn in a complaint can request a report back, and the CSOs will come back over a weekend or something and have 80 or 90 emails they have to respond to. So we have a couple of issues here. Number one is, I would like us to see if there's a way to do this on a need-driven basis, so that, half of our homes are rentals or half of our properties are rentals or something in that neighborhood, where someone doesn't have to tromp through every rental in the city every year and do an inspection. That being said, when I wrote a letter to the mayor pro tem, to Mr. Pond, requesting that this go on to as an agenda item. I had also made the suggestion, and I would like that to be a part of this discussion, in that since our public information officer has resigned, and that half of that budget was already, I believe, in with PD, I think the people would be better served. We could probably afford 2 CSOs for the cost of 1 public information officer. And I think having that where the rubber meets the road use of our resources may be beneficial and would be a transfer of existing budget funds. And I'd like to have some discussion on that while we're going over all of this, because there really is a lot of effort. It's time consuming on the part of the officers that are out there. Plus they do parks, they do, animal control, the whole 9 yards. I'm not so sure we're not understaffed. Thank you.
I think my comment to the PIO issue is, first of all, I'd like to say I would support additional CSOs. So I would support additional CSOs. The point that I disagree in is that it should be taken from the budget from a very needed position, which is the PIO. The police department and the city very much need that position. It's a very busy position. It's a full-time position, and I fully support replacing that person, replacing that position, and it's very much needed. However, I also support further CSOs to help with this issue, because not only do we have this issue with housing, but I get calls on many other issues too regarding CSOs and how much we need. And that is something we should probably look into. Do we need to allocate more money to those positions to serve the needs of our citizens?
If I could
Yeah, please.
real quickly, we've had a couple sessions of discussion on this, the chief and Ken and I, and talking about the staffing resources, and we believe that that we probably need to increase probably resources in certain different areas. And one suggestion the chief is making is to probably split up the duties of the code enforcement officers. So there's in 3 different divisions. You have some that are focusing specifically on animal control, some that are focusing on code enforcement, and some that are on park patrol. So that's probably something if council would like to continue going that direction, it's something we're going to propose during the budget process, and what the staffing requirements would be to do something like that. So I don't know if the chief or Ken has anything to add to that. That's a simple explanation of what we've talked about, but we feel that splitting up those duties would probably be the best.
So if I could, Mayor, just interject a little bit in this. In 2014, when Ken and I brought forward ways to enhance code enforcement to a previous council, one of our strategies in terms of how we looked at doing code enforcement and sort of taking a community policing problem-solving approach to that was to bring part-time staff on board to assist us during the summer months. We had over a few years prior to that, 2011, had brought 3 seasonal CSOs to help us with code enforcement. We had started the East Wheat Ridge project that had been pretty successful. There were requests from council to expand sort of that model to other areas of the city that were in need of that. So we made a request for 4 more additional part-time seasonal employees to help with that, and then also some of the issues we were having in our parks. Discovery Park had become a sort of a hot spot of activity in 2015, and there was a lot of community concern about the direction that park was going. The outcome of that, what we learned is bringing on board 7 seasonal employees has an impact from a positive perspective in terms of what we can deal with and how we can respond to the volume of nuisance code and park-related calls for service we got. But what we found is one of our full-time CSOs, our lead CSO, was in the office all day dealing with training issues and evaluation issues and reading reports just that these 7 individuals were doing. And we saw an increase in the volume of calls for service that we handled in code last year, and our proactive efforts drove some of that. So we had told council in 2014 that we would report back. We did in 2015 and said, hey, we think the model's working, and that things were going well, and for a variety of different reasons the wheels sort of fell off. For a variety of reasons, some people were looking for promotion opportunities, didn't feel that they had these here, other opportunities in other areas, and we've seen a departure of community service officers. So that's given us the opportunity to look at how we do community services, right? So our CSOs do 3 functions. So in most larger cities, what you'd see is a code enforcement unit that dealt strictly with code enforcement, animal control unit that dealt strictly with animal calls, and some sort of parks program that dealt with park enforcement. We've combined those 3 areas into one because, like a lot of us, we wear a lot of different hats to sort of provide services to the community we have. So one of the strategies that we're looking at, one of the suggestions I've made to the city manager, and we're still evaluating and trying to build out, is can we sort of divide up the responsibilities that we have with the existing personnel, the 5 CSOs and the supervisor, with some additional full-time positions, and have one group of people deal strictly with code enforcement and another group of people deal with animal control related calls. You'll know from previous discussions, about 60% of what our CSOs do are around code enforcement, and the other 35 to 40%, quite frankly, is around animal control, and a really small percentage around parks. So we think that we can assign Parks Patrol, make that a patrol function, maybe hire some seasonal park rangers to help us during the summer months, but not make it a full-time commitment, and then look at dividing that unit into 2 separate teams, one to deal with code enforcement issues and one to deal with animal control. The reality is I think we've been very successful in what we've done over the last 10 years as it pertains to code enforcement, and we're really starting to deal with more complicated code issues, particularly as a result of our work in the commercial areas in the city through the TLC program. So things that we didn't traditionally deal with before, parking lots, signs, facade, landscaping, are areas through the TLC program that we're starting to deal with, and they're much more complicated than somebody that's got 12-inch weeds, right? And or an old couch sitting on their porch. They're just more complicated kinds of issues. So we're in the process of putting together a staff report to the city manager as part of the budget process to bring to you to say, what direction would you like to go? How would you like to do this in the future? And we want to have a couple of recommendations for you, sort of a short-term fix to the challenges we have, and maybe a longer-term, more strategic look in regards to this. I would like to echo Genevieve's comments and on the PIO, communications manager. I don't have the staff to deal with the media issues, the branding issues, the social media issues that we deal with every day. We need that position. It's critical to the operations of the city and the police department. And that money that was budgeted really didn't go to city administration when we gave that position up. We kept that money in that training coordinator, accreditation manager position. So that money wasn't transferred down. We still have what used to be the training coordinator PIO. It's just now an accreditation manager and a training coordinator. And we wouldn't be successful. I'd have to find another means to deal with media and the marketing, particularly with the issues that we're dealing with from a policing perspective today. Although we're not a large city with a large population of color, we deal with the issues as a result of the outcomes of what's going on in Dallas, Baton Rouge, and in Denver, and in this community in terms of how we outreach and market ourselves as an agency. So I would encourage all of you to leave that PIO position intact, with all due respect, Mr. Matthews.
Let me do a little emphasis here. I'm hoping for your input. So far, what I'm getting is that of the 3 things, which was being aware of how many people were living in residences in a house. We're talked about code enforcement as well as inspections on the interior or the exterior of buildings. So what I'm hearing so far is the exterior seems to be the most important, with a lot of emphasis on code enforcement. So please keep coming in, but that's what I'm coming up with so far that you all are feeding us. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One question I had with relationship to specific rental properties is to whether or not specific code violations or issues transcend the ownership of the property by landlords, and so it's more of a property issue as it relates to maybe a management issue on a particular landlord's part. So one landlord manages it really well, whereas another landlord manages it poorly, or is it more the property itself lends it to being sort of a nuisance overall? Do you see situations where there's specific properties that just lend themselves to being just over the years being sort of a situationally poor as far as creating a nuisance or otherwise causing themselves to lend towards having certain issues over other properties, or is it specifically related to the management of that particular property by individual landlords or property management companies, or can you see any differences in the property type or the management, or any delineations between the two?
I think I understand where you're going on that, and I'd have to say that no, I'm not sure that we really do. It's a pretty wide spectrum. So if I'm hearing what you're saying, we've got some vacant lots in the city that some are well maintained. You know, once a month they get out there with a lawn service company and they mow down the grass and they keep it in reasonably decent shape. And we've got others that don't. And so we got to call to California, or we got to call, to Florida or to South Carolina to get property owners to say, hey, go cut those weeds. So at least there's a resemblance of some maintenance of property. In one instance, over my tenure as the chief here, we had one large multifamily housing unit in the city, and multifamily housing unit. And the previous owners were very, very difficult to deal with. They didn't do a lot of reinvestment in that property. So we dealt, and we're dealing with some pretty significant health and safety issues. Broken venting pipes, leaking toilets, just some significant electrical issues. A property was bought by another property owner who made it a Section 8 housing unit, but he had to conform to certain standards, as Mr. Fitzpatrick has talked about, and Fitzgerald, I'm sorry. I got a Fitzpatrick, and I always get them mixed up. Thanks. So you can wear both those hats, right? So they've gone in there, and it's not brought up to maybe the standard that some of us, would want in terms of living in or having our family live in, but it's an acceptable, standard, and it's clean and it's efficient, and there's a reinvestment that goes on with that. So I'd have to say it varies throughout the city. We've got property owners that reinvest in their properties and try to maintain a standard, and we have others that, it's an income generator, and that's primarily what it is. You don't see that reinvestment.
Okay. And do we have any indication of the total number of landlords that we're looking at as far as an aggregate number of landlords in the city at the present time, or a number, any ballpark?
I think we know. Or you go ahead.
Well, I don't think we do. I mean, I guess we have about 13,000 and change in terms of dwelling units, and as Mr. Matthews noted, a little less than half of those are rentals. So, we've got 6,000 units out there, but you'd have to slice and dice it in terms of, what is that? Does that mean we have 3,000 landlords, or I don't know.
Sure.
Probably something less than that, but
sure. And I think that just when you begin to look at the rental market, a significant number of those are owned by a very small number of individuals or management companies or groups of individuals, or whether that's inside the city or outside the city. And a very small number of those individuals actually live in the city and rent in the city. And so those individuals are those individuals that we may know and can talk to, or can say, hey, can you come deal with your rental property? It's those out-of-state situations or situations that may lend themselves to a bit more difficult to communicate with, and maybe trying to figure out those troublesome spots for communication, to try to figure out how do we deal with the troublemakers, and coming up with ways to communicate with those landlords that are difficult to communicate with, and coming up with sort of the top 20% that are difficult to communicate with, or the ones that have the highest number of code violations, or trying to identify in some way that subset so that we can somehow parse this out, as opposed to saying all landlords have to then register. Somehow parse this out, so we're being in some way judicious about how we're defining, who we're going after. Or it just seems like to have a landlord registration program, regardless of that everybody has to participate in, regardless of whether you're doing a good job as a landlord or a bad job as a landlord. It just seems sort of onerous, as Mr. Fitzgerald pointed out, that as a good landlord, you're doing everything you should be doing. You shouldn't have to do anything more than what you're already being asked to do. And if nothing else, you should be recognized for keeping up your property as a property owner. But so to that end, maybe we can come up with some kind of landlord council, or some group of local landlords that can somehow advise us as a city as to how can we bring in or coach or encourage a set of standards for landlords across the city that says, not only did we as a city come up with this is what the landlords wanted to come up with as well, or some way to say these are the standards that landlords brought upon themselves, as opposed to us as a council saying this is what we want to have happen. Some kind of landlord council comes together and says this is how we want to put this upon ourselves in some way, shape, or form, or some sort of advisory group of landlords within the city. And then those would generally be those landlords that are generally more responsive and are those good citizens that we all generally deal with, and are going to keep up their properties and are good stewards of their property. But I don't know, it just seems onerous to say to all landlords, now you have to register your property. And it is good to have a point of contact. It is good to have within the Section 8 program a housing quality standard, where we make sure that there is standards within that program, that everything is done by the book, that it is a clean, safe place for people to live. But it is a bit onerous when the city then has to come in and do that as well. And so then you have multiple inspections happening, and it is an invasion of privacy, and you want to try to find that balancing act, because now you have multiple layers on top of code enforcement, and how do you enforce all of that as well. But I do think once you start running the numbers, if you look at the dwelling units, you cut that in half, and then you look at the total number of actual property owners dwindles as you begin to look at who actually owns what. And at the end of the day, it's a lot of people you're either out of state, or the people that we're having the most trouble dealing with are the ones that we're having the most trouble communicating with. So trying to figure out some different ways to communicate with them, or showing them these are the number of police calls we've had out to this property in the past 12 months, because they don't know that. They, as a landlord, they don't get a notice every time the police go out to the property, potentially. So that's my thoughts.
I think it's been a good discussion, and most of the points that I would have already been made. I just want to play off of what Councilmember Urban just said, and ask is there any examples where short of a broader blanket approach to either a registration or rental inspection program, that in conjunction with code enforcement actions, that it does give you a pathway to appropriately or to escalate your communication or your enforcement on a property. Are there examples of that, or is in fact is that kind of our problem, is that we're kind of stuck, kind of out in the yard trying to solve things that aren't out in the yard?
Try this. Ken can jump in. So we have probably a half a dozen or more large issues with code enforcement that come up. Certainly the 38th and Hoyt issue was one of them, where there are complaints about there are too many people living in there. A unit, let's say in this case a duplex, that's two-level, has been made from a two-level housing unit to 4 separate living kinds of units. And what we try to do under the current model is to contact the property owner, the person, it could be the property manager, person living on site, to try to ascertain what was occurring there, who's living there, what their relationships are, how many units are being rented, but if people aren't willing to share that information with us, and they're not forthcoming, so what we're dealing with are the exterior issues, and we really can't get a look inside to see if significant changes have been made to the interior. Let's say turning a duplex into a fourplex, for instance. Putting in additional electrical, refrigerators, fireplaces, cooking stoves, and those kinds of things. Then we can't inspect that. We can't do that. So we have to rely on other kinds of things to sort of develop the probable cause that might be needed to move that case forward. So that's where it really becomes problematic. That's where it really becomes difficult to move forward. Thus, the suggestion here to look at how we define occupancy and to use sort of a rental inspection program, whatever that looks like. I'm not here to suggest anything other than the idea that a rental inspection program might be helpful in these really difficult cases to deal with some of the complex issues that we deal with, because we're the ones that end up dealing with really frustrated neighbors. That are demanding action and then see what they perceive to be inaction by community development or the police department in terms of what's occurring or what's going on. So it's a strategy, it's an approach to use to certainly understand the privacy issues that are involved in that. I really do. But there are communities in the Denver metro area and throughout the United States that have strong, vibrant rental and inspection programs, and they have helped those jurisdictions sort of address some of the issues that we're talking about. So.
I see this, it's funny because I see this parallel with what we were just talking about with pawn shops and secondhand stores, how I said, do you audit these people? How do you know they're doing what they're doing? And it was based off of, the cream kind of rises, or maybe not the cream, but the, whatever drops, that they kind of, you find them out based off of complaints or, whatever it might be. So it's interesting because, again, it's all about manpower, and is it the best use of our manpower to be auditing or inspecting the good rentals versus the bad ones, and do the bad ones just kind of percolate up and you find out who they are without having to audit 100%. So I think it's interesting parallel. But I think one of my big things is a couple things I want to say is I do support a PIO position, because I think a lot of what our community also says is we don't communicate well enough, we don't get information out, and so I think there's an importance there as well. And I also do support the CSO position. With the CSO position, however, I would support higher standards. And, you know, everybody knows how I freak out about weeds and snow shoveling and those types of things. But I think that's part of the problem is it's just kind of a festering issue, but it's not code enforceable. Like, for instance, if I have a yard full of rock and 70% of it is full of little, you know, sprawling, that little sprawl weed stuff, that's not really code enforceable, but it's horribly eyesore. Is it only code enforceable when it gets 2 feet tall, you know, type of thing? So I think, and, you know, same with the vehicles, you know, I mean, I don't have kids, but I know my sister had 2 sons. So at some point you do have a couple vehicles out front of your yard because you have teenage kids who maybe both have cars. But I think, again, it goes back to, but then there's the trailer and the boat and the, you know, those types of things, and, or the trees and the dead limbs. And, you know, I think that's, I mean, I think I support the CSO, but I really think we need to tighten up or look at some of these things that only become worse because people don't keep them up. So one little weed becomes, you know, sprawl, or one dead limb falls on somebody else's yard because they haven't taken care of it for 4 or 5 years. And I do have to say that it's not just rentals. You know, there are, you know, also properties that the owners aren't taking care of their property for multiple reasons. You know, perhaps they're older or, you know, whatever it might be. But I do think that all of this that we've discussed is important, but I think it goes beyond rentals because I can think of several owners that I would go and, you know, if I had my little code enforcement book. But the thing is I think some of it is not code enforceable. So you get the complaints about the properties and some of it is not, you know, under guidelines. So I'd really like to look at some of that because more clearly, in fact, we were looking up, again, this was Saturday night, online on my back patio, how many cars you can have on a, you know, in front of a house type of thing, and in the driveway. That was the question, in the driveway. So, you know, I do think that it's important. All of this discussion is important, but I think with that being said, I do think we need to you know, consider looking at some of our regulations to see if we need to tighten them up a little bit, including businesses.
I'm not sure I understood the question. The occupancy limits. You know, I think the issue with occupancy for us, and I think Ken would agree with this. If not, he can chime in. You know, are not the more significant of the issues that we deal with from a calls for service perspective, rather from a complexity perspective, right? In terms of when we get those complaints of over occupancy, they're difficult to investigate. They're time consuming. To prove. I think in the memo we've outlined what the numbers have been. I think there are a dozen, right around a dozen a year. They're just difficult and time consuming, and there tend to be other issues: weeds, trash, debris, too many vehicles, and so those tend to be the things that we can work on enforcing right away because those are pretty well defined. But it's the occupancy issues that tend to really make the neighbors upset and make them angry, and so we, from a time perspective, we end up oftentimes dealing a lot with community meetings, trying to meet with people, trying to tell them what we can do from a point in law perspective, what we can't do, what probable cause is, what reasonable doubt is, what we need to prove a case, and so they become complicated from that perspective and time consuming.
You know, I think Councilman Pond had a good idea that we ought to think about. I'd be willing to go so far as to say if there's an instance where there are an extraordinary number of police calls or extraordinary number of CSO calls, that we maybe can develop a new category of public nuisance or something of that order that would then result in some sort of an escalation of what could be done about that particular building, because there are good landlords and there are bad landlords. And I agree that we shouldn't inspect people who don't need inspecting. So I would go so far as to agree with the idea that we have a plateau that once reached will trigger something else.
So we have a disorderly house ordinance that we've also used about a half a dozen times a year that speaks to extensive calls for service as they pertain to police response or code enforcement response. We've certainly used that with one of the examples we've used tonight, cited the property owner for the disorderly house. It's sort of an escalation in regards to the charges, that I think works and is pretty effective.
Is there something you need to add to that?
I can certainly take a look at that and see if we need to add anything else in regards to that. So, we'll do that. But I think, to this point, in terms of how that ordinance is written, it's pretty effective for dealing with those kinds of situations. But I'll look at it again and I'll solicit input from my staff.
So you pretty much asked the question I asked, like, is there a threshold, and then what is our next step once we hit that threshold of how many times, you go out to the property? My other question is in relation to, like, do we have, where if we go to the property for, like, drug-related issues a certain number of times, then is there kind of a next step ordinance that we do there that would then allow something like a property inspection or things like that?
No, we can't do a property inspection. We can certainly get consent. So we have a couple of places that we're dealing with right now. One's sort of been a chronic one in your district that we've dealt with. We can't inspect that house or go into that house without consent or search warrant. We have been able to deal with some of the issues there and cite the owner for some violations based on what we've gotten, but it's one of those ones where we get a lot of input from the neighbors, but it's never enough to put a case together in regards to either a drug use or drug distribution kind of situation. But it's one that we continue to monitor, and I know at least in regards to the charges that resulted last year, that's either worked its way through the court system or is about to work its way through the court system. So.
And then I agree with Christy, although it's a little bit of a digression because it's not necessarily related to residential occupancy limits, but I do think that we should maybe take a little bit of a closer look at our codes, as in some of them can really be addressed within 7 to 10 days, but then there's others where that kind of broad stroke doesn't necessarily apply to some of the code violations, and a process to talk about a process about how to appeal what's in what they've actually been written up for, not necessarily the process that they've got their tickets on. And so I think if we could maybe look at that sometime in the future about code violations when we have the opportunity, the staff has the bandwidth to work on it.
Right. So the administrative model process that we currently use to deal with a lot of our administrative or a lot of our code enforcement issues we put into place in 2007. So none of you were around when we did that, but the issues that we faced then was that code enforcement issues had to be written into municipal court. And so the frustration with that, so a different standard level, a reasonable doubt standard level, which means if you write the citation, in layman's terms, you've got about a 60% chance of proving your case. It requires a significant amount of investigation and work to sort of prove your case. And once your case goes to municipal court, then you're tied to court procedures. So a person has a right to an attorney. If they can't afford one, a person has a right to to continuances, sometimes multiple continuances. So some of the code issues that we were dealing with when I became the police chief in 2005 were over 2.5 years old. Because there were constantly changes of attorneys, motions, different kinds of requests, delays, and so there was a really frustrated community and really frustrated elected officials in terms of dealing with that. So we looked at what other alternatives were out there. We looked both in-state and nationally, and this administrative model process of dealing with code enforcement issues, of taking it out of the municipal court framework and putting it into an administrative model was developed and was based on what many other jurisdictions were doing. And so the preponderance of evidence is a lesser standard. It's easier to prove. It's much like if you lose your license and you have to go to DMV, it's an administrative hearing officer, generally a legal officer, could be an attorney, could be a judge, a retired legal person has that hearing, and the standards for the introduction of evidence, what that evidence looks like, how it's presented, and decisions that are made in regards to that are of a lesser standard. So I'm aware of some individuals in the community that don't think that it's a fair process, but I've looked at their cases and how they handled, and they were fair processes, and they do have the right to appeal. They can appeal the administrative hearing officer's decision to district court, just like they can with the municipal court's decision. And certainly if the direction from council is that we want to look at that and put more requirements in place, then we can get with the city attorney and we can look and see what that looks like. But I'd caution you that if we add too many layers to that administrative model process, it's going to make it more difficult to get these issues resolved in the community, and it's going to take longer to do that, and you're going to hear from your constituents in regards to why is it taking so long.
Chief, Janice and I had spoken about this several weeks ago, and I'm sorry, Janice, maybe you didn't get the email I sent you with some explanation too, but could you clarify, I think Janice's question when we talked about it was, administrative hearing officer doesn't just rule on the process that the citation was issued correctly, but the administrative hearing officer can also rule on if the code enforcement officer went above and it didn't make.
So it's a multifaceted hearing. The code enforcement officer has to present the case, just like in a DMV here, an implied consent hearing for a DUI. An officer presents the case. They walk through the case. What the complaint was, what they dealt with. They show pictures. The administrative hearing officer has that case file there. They look through that. They will give the opportunity to the property owner to comment, to present their case, and they look at it both from the perspective of was the community service officer operating within the framework and context of the code, and was there a violation, and did we follow the right process, and those are all parts and pieces to that process. So I just present that to you, but I'm happy to look at other models if that's council's direction. But my caution on that would be code enforcement is a big issue in this community, and if we put too many layers to the current process that we already have, I think that you'll be hearing from people about why isn't this addressed, because it mimics the court system we had before. So, but I'd be happy to talk to you offline as well.
Mr. N.
Chief, you mentioned that other surrounding areas have rental inspection programs?
Yes.
Is it possible to bring...
City of Westminster has a rental inspection program that they've used for a number of years that's been pretty successful.
Are you able to bring that model to us, or where can I access that to take a look at what they're doing there?
We may have that model. Okay. Certainly if we don't, we can give you I can have my staff look and find out who a contact person might be for that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, I don't know that we've answered any of the questions, the threesome, but I'm hearing a lot, everybody is wanting more code enforcement, is that correct? Would that be correct?
What does that mean?
And what does that mean?
Well, code enforcement, so are we hearing that you would be okay with us bringing forward increases in resources that may help with code enforcement? And that's, okay.
And the standards also, okay. We'll look at those two items. So that's the code enforcement category, but then there's also the occupancy category. Do you want us to look at more, bring back more information about occupancy, how we control it, how we enforce it? And there was a pretty good description in your memo. The International Property Maintenance Code gives certain standards on how many square feet you need per bedroom, per living room, for the number of people living in there. We could make modifications to that if you want, so that, we say 1,000 square foot house can only have this many people in it. And then if you want to have more people, you need to prove that they're family members. Put the onus on them. And Ken can maybe get into that piece a little bit more if you want to talk about occupancy limits, or if I got some shaking heads. So
Okay.
Ken, you want to talk about that a little bit more?
The only thing I would say, and is just to Dan's point earlier of, in terms of what it looks like to knock on the door on any of these topics and gain access to a unit. I mean, I think part of the intent behind the suggestion about a rental property registration inspection program is that you have a reason and actually a requirement to actually enter the premises on some sort of a periodic basis. Very sensitive to all the comments that have been made in terms of privacy rights and how do you minimize those impacts in terms of good properties. You don't knock on their door, but every 3 years or something like that, right? I mean, so that it's as least intrusive as possible. But if we don't have a reason to enter the property like that, I would say whatever we do on over occupancy in terms of changing those standards, will continue to have its challenges, because we're likely not to be able to gain sufficient access to determine how many people are occupying there. I mean, the program forces the conversation, right? So that we know who the landlord is, we know that we get to go in there and visually inspect the premises so that we can make a reasonable assessment as to how much it's being occupied.
Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
Are you counting toothbrushes? I mean, how do you?
Well,
Go ahead, Mr. Pott.
Let me ask
No.
a question, and
I mean,
just,
that begs-
do we still have the report from the last time we discussed this? I mean, because I think there was quite a bit of work done.
Not an occupancy specific.
No, rental program.
Oh, rental, yes. Yes,
Rental
we-
inspection. So I'm just saying, because we've talked a lot, honestly, I think we've talked a lot about that, but haven't necessarily resolved it. Councilmember Duran has asked a couple times. Obviously, it might be, to bring that report back up, because this is a new council and this is obviously a topic that we're trying to get our heads around.
That doesn't, right now, I think we're on that specifically on occupancy, if you want us to change any.
Well, I know, but the question was getting
I'm
back to,
sorry.
no, Zach's question was getting to rental.
Oh, okay, okay.
And counting toothbrushes, not
They
people.
really are two
And so,
categories.
right, so no, again, I think one of the, and this is kind of how I read the report, that, between the code enforcement and potentially being able to have a rental inspection program, those things kind of potentially bracket the other issue.
Sure.
So if that's the case, again, we've been kind of dancing around kind of the shades of folks' tolerances or understanding even of those issues, and I'm just wondering if without a tremendous amount of work, if the previous report actually is a platform in which to continue the conversation, or is that not?
It is, I think it is specifically on the rental, on a rental inspection program, yeah. But it doesn't really get into
Residential.
it doesn't get into
Maybe we-
occupancy limits
Well, but
and the definition of family and what that is and not.
But I think for a landlord's interests and the city's interests are aligned in neither one want 100 people living in a residential property. They both want a reasonable number of people living in a structure, because that plays out in a structure that's going to last longer than otherwise. So those interests are aligned in that way. And so if we can work with those landlords to help them understand that if there's reasonable occupancy standards developed, whatever those are, that's going to help that landlord maintain that property over the long term. But if they have 20 people living in that property is not going to last much longer, or needs to be.
Chief Brennan.
Yeah, that's true. It's just, but they do it. some do it, some potentially do it, and if they say, yeah, we're all family, it's like we can't do anything about
Is
it.
there anything that you could think of, Chief Brennan, that would help put more teeth into it so that it would be easier for you? You said it was so difficult. The neighbors are particularly up in arms. It's very difficult to knock on the door.
Well, I
We
think
had some kind of rules.
I think what Ken and I wanted to try to accomplish, Patrick, was having a discussion around, the definition of occupancy. That's part of the issue, and so when you talk about the definition of occupancy, there are probably some things that we can add to the code as it pertains to people and square feet that would be helpful. The next step beyond that is that would be helpful in terms of dealing with some of those things and dealing with some of the concerns we hear from our citizens about some properties, not all properties, some properties, would be a rental inspection program. That would be a way that the city could try to address, some of the, systemic issues that we see with some properties. And our discussion in 2009 centered around both exterior, and I think most of council was in agreement that they were okay with an exterior program. When you start talking about interior inspections, you get into privacy issues, and nobody understands that more than the chief of police and what that looks like. But there are examples. I've been out in the field with my folks and have been in some places that I think if you all went out and did ride-alongs, you would look at and have the same sort of perspective that I had. They're not at the standard that I think this community would like to see from a health, safety, and welfare. That's not all of them. That's some of them. So how can you develop a program that sort of helps the city, move up in terms of its standard of housing, in the community, and that's a suggestion, and we can bring the previous report back to you. You can look at it. We can look at what Westminster has, and we're just suggesting that as a tool to try to address some of the issues that we have, or at least an understanding on your all's part of the complexity of some of these issues. And I think Mr. Matthews has seen that with property in his neighborhood. I'm going to have to beg out. I need to get to a roll call. I need to talk to my folks about what's going on in law enforcement nationally as a result of yesterday's event. So I've been trying to hit all our roll calls. So if you can, I'll excuse myself.
Thank you. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief.
Okay, so just summarize again. So we'll bring back a discussion about increased resources in code enforcement and maybe looking at the standards. So rental inspection, bring back what we've looked at in the past, just as a discussion point. There's a little bit of disagreement, but is there a consensus on that? They all want to hear about rental inspection? Okay.
And the rest.
Yeah, and it's not, I think when we looked at this several years ago, we looked at different options. If, the good properties, it's like, they're exempted for like 5 years or something, or, there's different options that you can look at, so it's focusing on the really bad properties, and that's the kind of, I think, discussion that I've heard tonight. Sure, has an idea. Yeah. So now occupancy specifically, do you want us to delve into that any further based on what was in the memo tonight? Do you want us to look at different standards for square footage?
That's the sense that I got, was that there was.
Well, I don't know if we got a consensus from council. Larry says yes. Is there a consensus on that?
Well, that information was available, consolidating. All right, so I got how many?
Well, I'm sorry, Zach got a question?
You're talking about coming up with a standard or how to enforce it?
All the above.
Okay. Well, again, the question of that person's here or not here, or they're only here 6 months a year, or they're not on the lease, they're on vacation. There's any number of sort of excuses someone's going to come up with to say that person doesn't live here, or it just seems like it's sort of fraught with, I don't know, just.
Yeah, it's not, as Ken said, it's even if we do try to make some changes that we recommend in the memo, it's still going to be very difficult to enforce. It's either we,
And the other part of that is it's sort of like there may be situations in which there might be a significant number of people living in a house which nobody ever finds out about because it never becomes a known issue outside of that house, and it's only those issues that become a known quantity to the neighborhood that
becomes a code enforcement issue. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So my question is, if we do adopt some occupancy standards, then how does that, I mean, does it effectively help?
Well,
the
and
department,
Zach,
the
Zach
police
just, I think, hit
department
it on the
a little
head. And when we talked about that, when we drafted this memo, it's like, that's what we kind of wanted to get tonight from you. Is it a code enforcement issue that you really want us to focus on? Because as Zach said, it's like there could be maybe 10 people living in a house that they're all not related. It's not following code, but they keep the house pristine. They only have a couple cars and you wouldn't even know it. So is that an issue? Maybe not. It becomes an issue when they have 20 cars and they're throwing trash in the front yard, and so that's a code enforcement issue. So that's kind of what we're getting at is if you think we can address, if these issues can be addressed with more intensive code enforcement, we don't probably have to go down the occupancy routes, because again, I don't know if there's a true solution to it. We can try to tighten it up, but
Yeah, actually, if the thing is, though, that if there is a demonstration of those irritants, it's against code already. So we already have the tool. We don't need any new legislation or code to deal with those things because there's already code.
well, if there's 10 people that live in the house and they're not related, they shouldn't be living there together. And again, we can't.
Yeah, but if they're pristine or...
Well, yeah, if they're pristine, that doesn't.
Right, but if they're throwing trash, that's against code.
It is, and that's an issue we can deal
10
with.
cars and 5 in the driveway.
But sometimes, but then it kind of domino effect, and you know, they can clean up to a certain standard, but the 38th and Hoyt is an example. It's like we get them to clean up one thing, but just because maybe it is overoccupied and we don't know 100%, that those things continue to happen. And it's just a never-ending, in some properties, it's a never-ending problem that you can't fix because of different factors. Sorry, Monica.
Can you bring back how our neighboring communities are dealing with that, and then maybe we can kind of discuss and make a decision from there?
Did we look at other cities?
Yeah.
It's not, at CML conference, I spoke to numerous cities about this, on how they define family. This isn't just a Wheat Ridge issue, that definitely.
Sure.
So we could look at that if
we can see if there's
a
anything else in
consensus.
place.
Well,
Let's make sure there's a consensus before we spend time.
Let's check on that. There's the factor that the neighborhood is, as the chief pointed out, there's a lot of unrest in the neighborhood because of the excessive occupancy of a house. No matter what, it adds more parking, more cars, more people, excuse me. So there was that. And if we had some kind of rules that you could grab onto, would that be more
Well,
valuable?
we do for the code enforcement issues, so.
What I'm talking about for occupancy.
Yeah.
Can I get a consensus to look at what our neighboring communities are doing and how they're dealing with this in occupancy and have the discussion from there?
Nope. 3.
To delve in further into occupancy and how to.
Delve further.
I thought we already had consensus to get into occupancy, didn't we?
Not yet, really.
Well, we sort of,
Code enforcement and and rental inspection program. We're still trying to get some kind of consensus on
But you're going to
occupancy.
find they're all related. I mean,
Well, they are.
They are.
We should be looking at all of the options so we can tie them together.
give me a show of hands if you want to look further in occupancy. Okay, I got an arm half up. No? 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, seeing as,
And just to comment on that is that I have no problem with it. I think it's fine, but I think it's kind of the next step, because I do think what we're talking about with code enforcement, it seems like even just in our conversation, code enforcement is really the kind of visible kind of and kind of most destructive force that we have, which is kind of nuisance, code complaints, etc. And then the rental inspection program, perhaps if we look at what we looked at before, I think that's again, that's kind of the next step. And I think the occupancy, they are all intertwined, but it's the next step. It's the third step. So, I mean, I would, if you're going to bring it all back, I want to make sure we're kind of putting the effort into the things in order. But it seems like that was the only reason, just to explain my consensus.
I have one in my neighborhood, and I don't know of anything that people don't come to me more about than that. How many people are living in that house? I hear that all the time. Various neighbors, not just one. So I know it's an irritant to our citizens is the main thing. Yeah, we didn't even get there, I think, at some point. All right, I think we've got the threesome, did we not? Are we done?
Ken, are you comfortable?
Ken, you okay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm hearing very mixed interest in the residential occupancy.
Yeah.
So. Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Well, if, you know, I mean, if, we don't want to put a lot of extra effort in looking at codes, and if people aren't, if you guys don't want the information, when we bring it back, if it's,
I'm guessing it's going to be, I mean, if we want to look into other jurisdictions, it's probably not just going to their code and seeing what we find out. It's probably sitting down with people and kind of figuring out how this issue really plays out,
Can we,
which is fine. It's just, it's going to take some time.
can we look at the code enforcement in the first two issues we talked about and revisit the occupancy after we talk about the first two, considering that we had talked about they'll lead to each other? Because they have limited resources as to how much time.
Ms. Davis has an idea.
I would support that as well, because I think the thing is I do think it's about code and code enforcement, and it could be related to the occupants not, you know, having broken down cars or whatever it might be, because I think it is a bigger issue, even with like the whole, it does go back to kind of like the Airbnb. I mean, there's a lot of factors to that even, you know, neighbors are saying, there's a different car here every day, and da-da-da, you know? So it's, the whole occupancy is an interesting thing that today's society, things are really getting weird.
how you define family too.
Yeah, family, and if I rent out my couch on Airbnb and, you know, those types of things, so.
Well, I mean, can we just, can we say we'll look at occupancy as the third thing?
Yes,
I mean,
I
it's
support
splitting hairs a little
So
bit.
we'll
there,
focus
but
on the first two.
Can we get
First
a
one, first one.
consensus
We
to
won't
look
drop
at the
occupancy, we'll-
occupancy as a third thing? Hands, please. Thanks.
Now we got it.
Thank you.
All right. I think that was our last item. Yeah, I think the meeting ended. Were you ready for that to be over? God, that was long, wasn't it?
Oh, we have elected officials. You can't adjourn yet. Go.